Imagine yourself holding a scroll that never ends. You unroll it slowly, line by line, and though your eyes grow tired, the words keep appearing, stretching further into the horizon. This is the shape of the modern feed, an endless cascade of images, headlines, and fragments of other lives. Unlike the pages of a book, there is no final chapter, no natural point to pause. The design removes the boundary that once signaled completion. And without that boundary, your mind never feels finished. Our brains, shaped by scarcity for most of history, once found satisfaction in small endings. A meal that was cleared, a letter that was folded, even a single completed task left behind the faint reward of closure. But in the infinite scroll, there is no closure. Each gesture, each flick of the thumb, promises that just below the surface may lie something better, sharper, more rewarding. The act of searching becomes the reward itself. Think of it like a slot machine that no longer requires coins. Pulling the lever is free, and the possibility of the next prize remains always within reach. The brain's reward pathways adapt to this rhythm, but they adapt imperfectly. Instead of feeling full, they feel suspended, hovering between expectation and gratification. The cycle is soothing in its predictability, but also restless in its incompleteness. Across cultures and centuries, people have built rituals to mark endings, closing ceremonies, folded garments, extinguished lamps. These gestures quiet the mind. But in the digital scroll, there is no ceremony of closure. The reward is postponed indefinitely. And so, the scroll itself becomes the companion, not a story to be finished, but a rhythm without end. Imagine yourself holding a simple object, your phone, a device no larger than your hand, yet carrying the ability to command your attention for hours. Each tap, each tiny vibration, each new piece of information or image is a spark, a microburst of reward, a fragment of pleasure that is small enough to be fleeting, but strong enough to pull you back again and again. The brain, wired for survival in ancient environments, never evolved to resist such constant trickles of novelty. What once was a rush from discovering ripe fruit or spotting a safe shelter is now echoed in the glow of a screen. The dopamine release is the same, though the context has shifted. Daily life begins to bend around this pattern. Imagine yourself waiting in line or sitting at a table. The pause feels empty, and so the hand moves almost without thought, clicking, scrolling, refreshing. Each time you return, you train your mind to expect another spark. The act is not about the content anymore. It is about the cycle itself. Tap, reward, repeat. In this way, technology has borrowed the same mechanisms that made slot machines so enduring. The possibility of something new, something just out of reach, keeps the system running. Historians note that societies have always created rituals of repetition. Beads strung for prayer, chants spoken in rhythm, games that relied on dice or cards. What we now experience digitally is not so different, though far more constant. The click has become our chant, the scroll has become our string of beads, and the screen, like an altar, is never far from reach. As you drift in thought, notice how these micro-moments are stitched into your memory, not as grand events, but as countless fragments, each one so small it feels weightless. Yet together, they shape the rhythm of a day, and perhaps even the direction of a life. The question that lingers is simple. Are we choosing these clicks, or are they quietly choosing for us? Imagine yourself in a time before clocks ticked in every pocket, when news arrived by horse, and waiting was simply part of life. A letter might take weeks to arrive, and replies carried across mountains or seas were treasures of delayed connection. The rhythm of their lives was slow, bound by seasons and the pace of feet. To pause was not a frustration, but an accepted part of existence, woven into the fabric of daily life. Now compare this with today, where a tap of the finger delivers an answer in seconds. A map unfolds instantly. A question dissolves into a search bar, and silence is quickly filled with notifications. Over time, this convenience reshapes the mind. We grow less tolerant of gaps, less willing to linger in uncertainty. The space between question and answer begins to feel unbearable, though it may last only moments. Historians note that even great thinkers once relied on long pauses: Aristotle wandering gardens, Newton sketching beneath trees. Their patience with stillness was fertile ground for ideas. But modern culture trims away these stretches of quiet. A delay in loading, a buffer wheel spinning, sparks irritation far sharper than the weeks our ancestors endured. This vanishing patience does not arrive suddenly. It seeps quietly into habits, refreshing a page, skimming headlines, tapping again for quicker streams of information. The body leans forward, expecting constant motion, while the mind forgets how to rest inside pauses. Imagine yourself at a candlelit table, centuries ago, waiting for word from a distant friend. That waiting was once life itself. Now, it has become almost impossible. Imagine yourself in a quiet library, its shelves stretching endlessly, filled with books whose spines no longer need to be opened. Once, memory was survival. People carried entire texts in their minds, preserved genealogies in song, and trained apprentices by repetition until every step of a craft became second nature. But in our present, when a search bar retrieves in seconds what once required years of study, the burden of recall has shifted. Memory, once muscle, now lies dormant, delegated to circuits and screens. Daily life shows this shift in subtle ways. Few remember phone numbers, directions, or even recipes by heart. Instead, devices serve as external vaults, holding details we once rehearsed endlessly. The rhythm of daily tasks flows around a quiet assumption that knowledge, if needed, will always be there, waiting to be summoned. Yet this reliance reshapes how we experience remembering itself. You may find that facts fade more quickly because the act of storage feels less necessary when retrieval is so easy. In history, cultures without writing relied on elaborate oral traditions. Ancient bards could recite epics thousands of lines long, their minds trained to hold images, rhythms, and stories. Memory was art, cultivated with care. Today, the art is outsourced. The contrast is striking. What once lived in human voices now lingers in archives and algorithms. It raises a quiet question. What happens to the intimacy of memory when it no longer resides within us, but in distant servers? And yet, this shortening of memory does not erase our desire to connect. Instead of memorizing facts, we remember where to look, how to phrase a query, which archive might yield the answer. The memory is no longer of content, but of pathways. Imagine yourself, then, not as a vessel of knowledge, but as a navigator of knowledge's vast ocean. The pattern of life continues, though its rhythm has shifted, from inward recall to outward search, from the deep silence of recollection to the soft click of retrieval. This gentle paradox lingers. By forgetting more, we may remember differently, not less, perhaps, but elsewhere. The identity mirror. Imagine yourself scrolling through a feed, pausing at your own reflection, not in glass, but in pixels. A photograph you selected, perhaps retouched, arranged, captioned with words chosen more carefully than most conversations. Online, this becomes you. It is not the entire you, but a fragment brightened, sharpened, and endlessly replayed. Over time, you begin to see this reflection more often than your actual face in a mirror. Slowly, it speaks back, telling you who you are or who you must continue to be. In earlier centuries, identity was tied to place and role. A village knew you as the baker, the scribe, the seamstress, the child of familiar parents. Reputation was bound to proximity. Today, it travels untethered. Your digital presence shapes how strangers across oceans define you, and with repetition, their perception seeps inward. The profile becomes the person. The mask hardens into skin. Psychologists once described this as the looking glass self. the idea that we see ourselves through the eyes of others. But in a digital age, the mirror multiplies. Instead of a handful of neighbors, you may sense hundreds, thousands of silent gazes. Each like, each absence of attention, molds the reflection you carry back into your offline life. What you post online changes what you expect of yourself in the quiet hours. Think of performers in history, actors on a stage, leaders before crowds. They too lived by mirrors, but only in fleeting moments of performance. Today's stage never dims. Even when you step away, the reflection lingers, waiting to be checked, updated, compared. The line between true memory and curated self grows hazy. You may begin to wonder, are you shaping the mirror, or is the mirror shaping you? And perhaps beneath every screen, the most unsettling question persists. When the reflection becomes more familiar than the face, which one is real? Imagine yourself wandering through a hall of mirrors. Each reflection shows not you, but someone else, smiling, thriving, succeeding in ways that seem just out of reach. You walk further, and the reflections multiply. Some shimmer with wealth, others with beauty, others with experiences so carefully displayed they feel almost staged. This is what the modern feed becomes, not a neutral collection of lives, but a gallery of comparisons. For most of human history, the circle of comparison was small. You measured yourself against neighbors in the village, colleagues in the guild, relatives at the table. The scale was limited, and so was the pressure. But now, with every scroll, you step into a marketplace of infinite mirrors. Each one whispers a quiet suggestion. You could be more. You should be more. And slowly, the definition of enough shifts. The brain adapts quickly to these cues. A post glimpsed for only seconds can still leave an imprint, a shadow against your sense of self. You may not recall the image clearly, yet the feeling lingers, the unease of being slightly behind, slightly less. Unlike hunger or thirst, this need for comparison cannot be fully satisfied. Each new glance renews the cycle, pulling you back into the hall. Anthropologists note that many cultures once used ritual to mark sufficiency. The shared harvest meal, the finished garment, the completed song. These moments told people, gently, that what they had was enough. In the comparison trap, there is no such marker. The feed scrolls onward, showing no ceiling, no boundary, no final chorus of contentment. So you keep walking through the mirrored hall, seeing yourself only through the outlines of others. And the question becomes less about what you have and more about whether the mirrors will ever allow you to feel complete. Imagine yourself certain that your phone has just vibrated, a faint tremor against your leg, a subtle pulse in your hand. You reach to check, expecting a message or a call, only to find the screen dark and still. Nothing has arrived, yet the sensation was real enough to draw your attention, to interrupt your thoughts, to pull you out of whatever moment you were in. This is the phantom buzz, an illusion of touch created by your own nervous system, shaped by expectation and repetition. In daily life, the body learns patterns so thoroughly that it begins to anticipate them before they occur. Just as you might hear your name in a crowded room even when it was never spoken, or feel the motion of a ship beneath your feet long after stepping onto land, so too can the mind conjure the vibration of a phone. It is not imagination in the playful sense. It is the nervous system, trained to notice the smallest cues, misfiring in the silence. Psychologists have traced this to conditioned responses. Each real vibration strengthens the link between touch and attention until even the faintest muscle twitch, a shift in clothing, or the brush of fabric can trigger the brain's alarm. Students in studies report phantom vibrations multiple times a week. Some describe them as harmless curiosities, others as constant interruptions, a reminder of how deeply technology has woven itself into their bodies. If you think back to earlier eras, there were echoes of this experience. Soldiers on distant fields wrote of hearing phantom bugles, commands that never sounded but felt urgent in the ear. Sailors described phantom winds on still days, gusts remembered by the body though the sea was calm. The phantom buzz belongs to this lineage of human illusions, amplified by modern devices, yet deeply tied to how we process the world. And as you let your mind drift, notice the quiet question it leaves behind. When the body convinces you of something that never happened, how much of daily life is sensation, and how much is only memory, rehearsed until it feels true? Imagine yourself standing by a river that has overflowed its banks. The water rushes past, faster than you can take it in, carrying branches, stones, and soil. You cannot follow each piece. You only watch as the current swallows more than the eye can hold. This is what modern life often feels like, not a gentle stream of knowledge, but a flood of information, wider and louder than memory was built to endure. In earlier centuries, information arrived in smaller currents. A traveler's tale at a fire, a priest's sermon echoing in stone halls, a book painstakingly copied by hand. Each fragment of knowledge was precious, repeated until it took root. To remember was to preserve, and memory itself was shaped like a well-tended archive. Today, you might scroll through 100 fragments before breakfast. News, opinions, images, reminders, all colliding in minutes. Like shards of glass scattered across a floor, the pieces glint but rarely form a whole. You may hold a detail for a moment, a headline, a face, a fact, before it slips away, displaced by the next. What remains is not depth, but a shimmer, a blur where no single thought lingers long. Psychologists note that the mind has not evolved as quickly as the flood around it. Working memory, once sufficient to hold a conversation or a story, struggles when overloaded. Imagine villagers once gathering in quiet to hear a single song retold each winter. Contrast that with a modern feed, where countless voices compete at once. One path leads to memory etched deep, the other to fragments scattered before they can connect. In this way, the information flood is not just abundance, it is erosion. It wears down patience, focus, and the gentle rhythm of remembering. Like standing at that overflowing riverbank, you may find yourself watching more pass by than you will ever hold. Imagine yourself watching a message arrive on your screen. Instead of a sentence, it carries a single symbol, a face, a flame, a heart. In an instant, it conveys mood, tone, and intention. Yet behind its simplicity lies a profound shift in how memory and communication function. Where once feelings were traced in letters, layered with nuance, now they are compressed into icons, uniform across languages and cultures. The emoji acts like a shorthand, stripping emotion to its most recognizable outline. Daily life has absorbed this compression. A smile sent in pixels replaces the careful phrasing of joy. A broken heart icon stands where once words might have explored sorrow in detail. The rhythm of conversation quickens as subtlety is reduced, each exchange punctuated with symbols that can be read instantly, but not deeply. Over time, the act of reaching for these icons rewires expression itself. You may find it easier to show feeling through selection than through speech, easier to gesture toward emotion than to describe its shades. Historically, humans painted walls, carved runes, or crafted poems to give shape to inner life. Every mark carried interpretation. Every symbol demanded context. Emojis, in contrast, arrive already interpreted, already flattened into clarity. This is their strength and their paradox. They allow connection across distance, yet in doing so, they standardize feeling. The complexity of sorrow, the ambiguity of affection, the restless shades of anger. These are narrowed into a single face or hand sign. Still, there is comfort in their simplicity. Imagine yourself sending a small, glowing heart into the void of the digital world. It is received and understood. The subtle threads of human connection endure, even if woven in different fibers. Perhaps the emoji brain does not replace depth, but shifts where depth resides, from words into context, from symbol into silence, from the precise into the shared. This gentle paradox remains. By shrinking our language of emotion, we have widened its reach. The sleep hacker. Imagine yourself in a quiet room, the hour late, yet the glow of a screen holds your gaze. Its light is steady, cold, almost clinical. What feels like a harmless habit, checking messages, watching a final video, quietly disrupts rhythms older than civilization itself. Your body waits for darkness to signal rest, but the screen offers a false dawn, tricking the brain into believing the day has not yet ended. Centuries ago, life surrendered naturally to night. Lamps flickered, fires dimmed, and melatonin rose within the bloodstream, guiding the body towards sleep. Villages fell silent except for the distant call of nocturnal animals. Today, that rhythm has been broken. In place of stars, you stare at blue-lit windows, light tuned to keep the mind alert. It is the most subtle of intrusions, not forcing you awake, but persuading you that wakefulness is still necessary. Researchers have shown that even brief exposure delays the release of melatonin. A single glance at a phone can reset the body's clock by minutes or hours. Over time, the pattern compounds. Minds that once rested after sunset now linger into the early morning, suspended between exhaustion and stimulation. What feels voluntary, choosing one more scroll, is in truth a trained response, the body adapted to artificial light as though it were command. Imagine an ancient traveler suddenly placed in this world. To them, the night would feel endless, unnatural, as though humanity had stolen time from its own rest. Yet for you, this has become routine. You adapt, just as countless others adapt, until the very idea of sleeping at dusk feels foreign. And here lies the paradox. The tools you hold to fill idle moments have quietly rewritten the deepest patterns of your biology. A glow designed to connect you to the world instead disconnects you from the ancient rhythm of rest. Each night, the sleep hacker returns, not as a thief in the dark, but as the light itself, persuading you to resist the silence your body still craves. Imagine yourself in a crowded square centuries ago. A single shout rises above the noise, fear in the voice, sharp enough to make others turn their heads. Within moments, the murmur spreads. People who did not hear the words still catch the tone, their bodies already bracing. One emotion has leapt from one mind to many, carried not by logic, but by contagion. This pattern has always been part of human survival. Joy in a celebration drew others closer, uniting groups through rhythm and laughter. Anger in a conflict spread just as quickly, aligning strangers against a common threat. Emotions were signals, shaping collective behavior faster than deliberate thought could. Our brains evolved to catch these signals instantly, for delay could mean danger or missed belonging. Today, the square has become digital. Instead of voices echoing through stone streets, emotions ripple across timelines and feeds. A sharp headline sparks outrage, a photo radiates joy, a rumor carries fear. Each piece of content is designed to transmit feeling first, facts later. And just like in the ancient square, the response is nearly automatic. You might not choose to feel it, yet the current pulls you in. Neuroscientists describe how mirror neurons and mood circuits make this possible. The body reacts before the mind fully interprets, leaving you briefly at the mercy of the emotional wave. And because digital platforms reward engagement, the emotions that spread farthest are often those most contagious. Anger that demands response, joy that begs to be shared, fear that insists on vigilance. Across cultures, rituals once absorbed these waves, chants, dances, or moments of silence that gave emotions a container. Without such boundaries online, the feelings continue to flow, often long after their source has faded. And so the viral emotion becomes not just an event, but a rhythm, reshaping how you experience your day, until you pause and notice which moods are truly yours and which arrived from somewhere else. Imagine yourself beginning a word on a glowing screen. Your fingers move quickly, without pause, and even when the letters stumble out of order, you trust that they will be corrected. A red underline appears, or a suggestion slips above the keyboard, and almost without thought, you accept it. Soon, you forget whether you ever knew the rule in the first place. Was it I before E, or some other exception. Did you once memorize the placement of double consonants, or has that memory faded into the background, replaced by a quiet dependence? This is the autocorrect mind, a subtle shift where language no longer flows from memory, but from an invisible assistant, smoothing errors before they even register. Daily life is increasingly shaped by this quiet outsourcing. Students who once carried spelling drills in their notebooks now rely on devices to carry the weight. Professionals, writing at speed, allow algorithms to polish their sentences, trusting invisible systems to maintain a standard of correctness. Over time, the rhythm of writing itself changes. Confidence rests not on what you know, but on what the device knows for you. Historians of literacy remind us that memory has always shifted with technology. When writing replaced oral tradition, people worried that memory itself would weaken, that dependence on books would make minds forgetful. Later, with the printing press, the ability to recall texts gave way to the ability to locate them. Each step in communication carried both relief and loss. Autocorrect is part of this same lineage, offering ease but asking us to surrender part of the craft. Imagine the quiet strangeness of a future where you can no longer spell your own language without help. Letters would feel unfamiliar, their rules distant, as though they belonged to another time. Yet, like so many before us, you would not notice the shift as it happens. The change arrives gently, word by word, suggestion by suggestion, until the lines blur between what was once learned and what is now borrowed. Imagine yourself in a library centuries ago. The walls are lined with shelves of parchment and leather, each volume holding the careful labor of scribes. If you wish to know a fact, a king's reign, the distance between cities, the nature of a star, you might spend hours searching. The very effort pressed the knowledge more deeply into memory. To seek was to learn, and to hold it in mind was a necessity, for retrieving it again was no simple task. Now compare that rhythm with today. A question appears in thought, and almost without pause, fingers reach for a device. The answer emerges instantly, neat and complete, dissolving curiosity before memory has the chance to bind it. Psychologists call this the Google effect, the tendency for memory to weaken when the mind trusts that information can be retrieved at will. It is not that we forget entirely, but that we no longer feel compelled to store facts ourselves. The brain grows skilled at remembering where to find information, rather than what the information is. Experiments show that when participants believe a fact is saved on a computer, they recall it less clearly than when they think it might be erased. The presence of a digital archive alters not only what we remember, but how we choose to remember. Imagine yourself recalling not the date of an event, but the steps you took to search for it. In this way, memory shifts from content to location, from holding to pointing. For earlier generations, memory was a personal archive, fragile yet deeply human. Today, much of it drifts outward, into servers and search engines, always waiting to be summoned. What once lived in the mind now lives in the cloud, leaving us lighter, but also more dependent on the quiet promise that the answers will always be there when we ask. Imagine yourself standing before an endless shelf, each item glimmering with equal promise. The more you scan, the harder it becomes to choose. This is the paradox of infinite choice. What should grant freedom instead creates hesitation. In daily life, it appears quietly, scrolling through films but never pressing play, browsing menus until hunger dulls, or comparing countless products only to abandon the cart. Each option reflects possibility, but the abundance erodes clarity. Instead of certainty, you feel the weight of indecision. The human mind evolved to decide among limited paths. A hunter chose between two trails, a farmer between seeds, a traveler between villages. Decisions carried consequence, but not an overwhelming sea of alternatives. Today, in digital marketplaces and infinite feeds, that sea stretches without horizon. You may find yourself circling through options not because you lack preference, but because preference dissolves when everything is available. History offers echoes of this dilemma. Ancient philosophers warned that excess abundance could fragment the soul. Stoic thinkers urged narrowing one's focus, not expanding it. Even in medieval marketplaces, where stalls multiplied with growing trade, observers wrote of shoppers overwhelmed by abundance, unable to decide where to spend their coins. The tension is not new, it is amplified. And yet, this paradox hides a quiet truth. Freedom without limits is not freedom at all. Constraints, whether of circumstance or ritual, once gave decisions their shape. Imagine yourself choosing from 3 worn books on a small village shelf. Your selection might feel narrow, but your certainty would be stronger. The paradox of modern life lies in the reversal. With every choice available, commitment weakens. Still, in the rhythm of this endless search, there is comfort. By wandering the infinite, you are reminded that choice itself is a luxury, even when it exhausts. Perhaps the gentle solution is not to seek the perfect option, but to let the imperfect one be enough. The meme brain. Imagine yourself glancing at an image paired with a short line of text. Within seconds, you understand the joke, the reference, the mood. It is quick, almost effortless, and it leaves behind a trace that lingers longer than you expect. A single phrase becomes a shorthand for entire experiences, a compressed fragment that replaces the need for explanation. In older times, ideas traveled slowly. Proverbs, poems, and parables carried wisdom across generations, often wrapped in rhythm and story so they could be remembered. The meme serves a similar function, but at a different speed. Instead of recited in gatherings, it spreads through endless screens, stripped to essentials, traveling across borders instantly. What once took years to embed into culture now arrives in hours, reshaping how people think and speak. This compression of thought has subtle effects. Nuance, context, and contradiction often fall away. Complex events are distilled into catchphrases, symbols, or recurring formats. A political debate may survive only as a single expression. A personal struggle may be reframed as humor. Even grief can be translated into a template, softened and shared until the original feeling is almost unrecognizable. Researchers studying memory note how repetition strengthens recall. When a meme is repeated, reshaped, and reshared, it becomes not only a cultural artifact, but a mental habit. You begin to recognize life through the lens of fragments, moments matching formats you've seen before. The brain, trained by repetition, responds with instant association, as though thought itself has been tuned into shorter wavelengths. Imagine past generations hearing a proverb by firelight, reflecting slowly on its meaning. Now, reflection often collapses into reaction. The meme brain favors speed, familiarity, and instant comprehension. And yet, behind this simplicity, a paradox forms. The more we reduce, the more the fragments define us. A phrase or image meant only for passing amusement begins to shape the very language we use to understand the world. Imagine yourself sitting in quiet when a sound breaks the stillness. A chime, a vibration, a small flash of light. Before your mind registers what it means, your body has already shifted. Heart rate quickening, attention narrowing. The signal is simple, yet it pulls you instantly. This is the design of the modern notification, crafted to interrupt, to redirect, to condition. Psychologists once described Pavlov's dog salivating at the ring of a bell, trained to expect food through repetition. Today, the same principle is applied to you. Each alert pairs with a possibility, a message, a like, a chance that someone has noticed you. The uncertainty is what makes it powerful. Not every sound carries reward, but the chance that it might is enough to trigger anticipation. The brain leans forward, waiting. Historically, signals carried weight because they mattered for survival. A knock at the door meant a visitor. A bell in the village meant gathering. These interruptions were rare, and so they held importance. But in the digital environment, signals arrive constantly, detached from urgency. The body still reacts as if each alert were vital, releasing small bursts of adrenaline and dopamine, sharpening attention again and again. Over time, this repetition shapes behavior. You may notice yourself checking even when no sound is heard, as though the anticipation itself has become a reflex. Like Pavlov's animals, the body prepares at the faintest cue. Yet, unlike them, there is no final meal, no completion of the experiment, only the cycle: alert, response, release, repeat. Across cultures, people once created rituals to restore stillness, silencing bells at dusk, closing shutters at night, laying aside tools until morning. These boundaries told the body it was safe to rest. But in the age of perpetual alerts, that silence grows rare. And so the question lingers. When the signal calls again, are you answering by choice or by conditioning? Imagine yourself pausing on a thought. A question flickers at the edge of your mind, small, ordinary, and unimportant. In the past, you might have let it linger, uncertain, a curiosity without an answer. But now, almost without hesitation, your hand reaches for a device. You type a few words, and within seconds the question dissolves into certainty. This act repeats countless times each day. The ritual of wondering has been replaced by the ritual of searching. Daily life is threaded with these tiny inquiries: the meaning of a phrase, the age of a forgotten actor, the date of a historic event. Each moment that once might have passed unanswered is now filled. The silence of not knowing grows shorter and shorter. What was once a natural part of human experience, sitting with mystery, now feels uncomfortable, as though the brain has grown allergic to uncertainty. Researchers describe this as a feedback loop. Each successful search strengthens the habit, rewarding the mind with immediate closure. Dopamine fires not only at the discovery itself, but at the anticipation of resolution. Over time, the reflex deepens. The mind begins to prefer shallow certainty over the slower patience of reflection. To know quickly becomes more valuable than to think deeply. History offers parallels. In ancient marketplaces, travelers carried questions for weeks, seeking sages or scholars to provide answers. The slowness gave the question weight, allowed it to shape thought and perspective before resolution arrived. Today, questions rarely last more than a breath. Knowledge has become instantaneous, but also more disposable. Answers slip past as quickly as they appear, barely absorbed before the next search begins. And so you may wonder, if every question is answered before it has time to grow, what happens to the art of wondering itself? Does curiosity deepen, or does it scatter into fragments, each one resolved too quickly to leave a lasting trace? Imagine yourself settling into a chair after a long day, promising only a single episode, a brief escape. The light from the screen spills softly into the room, and the story begins to unfold. Then, without realizing how, hours slip past, the sun has set or risen again, and the boundary between one episode and the next feels blurred, almost erased. This is the stream fog, a gentle distortion in the way the mind perceives time when immersed in endless sequences of narrative. For much of history, stories came in measured portions. Villagers gathered at dusk to hear a tale recited from memory, or families paused each week for the reading of a serialized chapter. The rhythm of waiting gave shape to the story itself. Anticipation stretched time, and memory filled the gaps. A tale carried you through days of labor before it continued. Streaming changes this rhythm entirely. Episodes follow without pause, designed to fade one into the next. The mind enters a trance-like state, lulled by familiar cues, softened by repetition of voices and music. Psychologists note that in these moments, awareness of passing time weakens. The brain, absorbed in narrative flow, stops anchoring itself to external markers like meals, movement, or conversation. Hours collapse into minutes, and the ordinary sense of duration is scrambled. This fog is not simply distraction, it is a quiet suspension of self, where attention narrows and external awareness recedes. You may remember the arc of a plot, but not the texture of time that carried you through it. Imagine yourself in a medieval tavern where a bard continues a tale deep into the night. Patrons listen, entranced, until candles burn low. Then imagine the modern counterpart, an endless queue of stories, no candle to remind you of the hour, only the faint realization that time has disappeared into the glow. Imagine yourself in a quiet room with nothing to distract you. For centuries, these moments of stillness, what we now call boredom, were unavoidable. A traveler waited for the cart to arrive, a farmer paused while seeds took root, a child stared at the ceiling beams through long winter nights. In those empty spaces, imagination stirred, minds wandered, stitched together stories, or discovered patterns in ordinary things. Boredom was not simply absence, it was a fertile ground where curiosity grew. In daily life today, that space is vanishing. A screen waits in every pocket, a notification flickers before silence takes hold, and even a pause in conversation can be filled with scrolling. The rhythm of existence has changed. Where once you might have watched shadows shift on a wall, now you refresh a feed. The subtle ache of waiting has been replaced by constant stimulation. And though it feels like progress, an escape from discomfort, it also conceals a quiet loss. History shows how boredom shaped culture. Monks in medieval cloisters, confined to silence, wrote illuminated manuscripts filled with intricate detail, their designs born from long hours of repetition. Sailors on months-long voyages entertained themselves by crafting knots, songs, and stories that became traditions. In these stretches of emptiness, invention emerged. Even in childhood, the complaint of "I'm bored" often gave way to games, drawings, and imaginary worlds. Without that hollow space, creativity had no need to surface. The paradox is gentle yet striking. The more we banish boredom, the less room imagination has to breathe. Endless stimulation keeps the mind occupied, but it rarely lets it wander. Imagine yourself allowing a moment of silence, resisting the urge to fill it. In that pause, ideas begin to take shape again, unhurried, unplanned. Boredom returns not as an enemy, but as a companion, an opening where thought can stretch. Perhaps what we call boredom was never emptiness at all, but the doorway through which imagination entered. The FOMO Pulse. Imagine yourself checking a screen, not because you need to, but because of the possibility. Something might have happened, a message might have arrived, a moment might have passed without you. The mind searches for reassurance, yet the act only breeds more hunger. Each refresh offers a chance at relief, but the relief fades quickly, replaced by another quiet urgency. Check again. In earlier centuries, absence was natural. A letter could take weeks to arrive, and silence was part of life's rhythm. People went to bed not knowing what news would come with the morning sun, and the world felt no less connected. Today, silence is rare. The pulse of networks beats constantly, and with it grows the fear of missing what others already know. Psychologists describe this cycle as anticipatory reward. Each refresh is a roll of the dice. The brain releases dopamine not when certainty arrives, but when possibility hovers. The chance of finding something new keeps you tethered, even if most refreshes yield nothing at all. The uncertainty itself becomes the hook. Think of ancient marketplaces, crowds gathering for stories, gossip, or distant news. There, too, people feared exclusion, the shame of being the last to know. But those rhythms were occasional, anchored to physical gatherings. Today, the gathering never ends. The crowd is global, its voice is endless, and you are always on the edge of being late to the conversation. This is the paradox of the FOMO Pulse. It offers connection while breeding disquiet. What began as a tool for awareness becomes a source of restlessness, urging you to remain alert even when the body longs for stillness. Each notification, each blank space where one might appear, beats like a pulse reminding you of what you could be missing. And in following it, you risk missing the one presence always within reach, your own quiet moment waiting patiently for your attention. Imagine yourself at a desk, surrounded not by papers, but by windows, each one glowing, each one open at once. One holds a half-written note, another an unfinished search, another a message waiting for reply. Your attention hovers, never settling fully, as if pulled gently by invisible strings. This is the rhythm of the multi-tab mind. Thought divided into fragments, each shard demanding a sliver of focus. In earlier times, tasks unfolded linearly. A letter was written, sealed, and only then could the next begin. A meal was prepared, eaten, and cleared before another duty arose. The structure of life imposed completion, but the digital desk erases that sequence. Now, everything stays open, every possibility preserved in a suspended state of half-done. Cognitive studies suggest that each switch carries a hidden cost. A tab left behind lingers quietly in memory, a background hum reminding you it remains unfinished. When multiplied across dozens, the hum becomes a chorus, thinning concentration. The mind adapts by skimming, tasting the surface of each window rather than sinking into depth. The fragments accumulate, but coherence slips away. Cultures once protected focus with boundaries. Monks copied texts in silence. Merchants closed ledgers at dusk. Households reserved hours for single tasks. These rituals anchored attention, allowing thought to travel deeply rather than scatter. In contrast, the multi-tab environment rewards dispersion. The more places your mind divides itself, the more active it feels, yet the less whole it becomes. So you move from one window to the next, never quite closing any. The tabs glow like lanterns, each one unfinished, each one waiting. And gradually, the desk no longer belongs to you. You belong to it, a guest wandering from shard to shard, searching for the quiet that comes only when all the windows finally dim. Imagine yourself scrolling through a feed, eyes moving across carefully arranged images and voices that speak with confidence. A stranger's living room becomes familiar. Their morning routines repeat until they feel almost like your own. Without realizing it, the mind begins to mirror these fragments. Their smiles, their diets, their possessions become quiet benchmarks against which you measure your life. These are not friends nor family, but strangers, yet their influence seeps in through repetition and design. Daily life shifts in subtle ways. A certain brand of clothing seems more appealing. A style of kitchen feels oddly necessary. The routines of people you will never meet become templates for how you evaluate your own choices. This is not imitation in the old sense, where neighbors copied what they saw in their villages or marketplaces. It is something quieter, more constant. Algorithms curate strangers until they feel like companions, and the brain, tuned to mirror others for survival, accepts the performance as truth. Psychologists call this social comparison, a tendency that has existed for as long as people have lived in groups. But once, those groups were small, and comparisons were grounded in shared reality. Today, the stage is global, and the people we mirror may live lives far removed from our own means or circumstances. The effect, though often unnoticed, creates a constant undercurrent of dissatisfaction, a life lived in reference to someone else's highlight reel. Historians note that each era invents its own idols: painted portraits of royalty, radio voices of celebrities, the polished images of movie stars. Yet never before has the influence been so intimate, carried in your pocket, woven into the rhythm of your day. The stranger becomes a silent guest at your table, a measure for what you have and who you are. And so you may ask, if your mind mirrors strangers so completely, how much of your life is chosen by you, and how much is simply borrowed from the lives of others? Imagine yourself in a quiet hall with walls of polished stone. You speak a word and it returns, softened but familiar, echoing back in patterns that never quite change. Each repetition feels both reassuring and confining. This is the echo chamber, once a natural curiosity of acoustics, now a metaphor for how our thoughts are shaped online. In earlier centuries, conversation unfolded in town squares, marketplaces, or taverns. Voices mingled, opinions clashed, and even the most insistent speaker was met with contradiction. To encounter different views was an unavoidable part of daily life. Yet in the digital world, the pattern is different. Algorithms learn what you pause to read, what you linger to watch, and slowly, they adjust the walls around you. The result is a chamber where familiar ideas repeat, reinforced until they feel universal. Psychologists describe this as a loop of confirmation. Each exposure to a repeated belief strengthens memory until dissenting views begin to feel distant or even threatening. Imagine yourself reading a medieval manuscript copied in a monastery, every word carefully preserved, yet unchallenged, echoing the same worldview for generations. Now compare that to a modern feed, tuned to your preferences, reflecting only fragments that align with what has already drawn your attention. The echo chamber comforts by reducing friction. It reassures with the feeling of consensus, but it also narrows imagination, trimming away the unfamiliar. Time spent within its walls can make the wider world seem sharper, stranger, or even unreal. And yet, like the ancient hall where your voice comes back again and again, it is not silence that traps you, but repetition. You remain surrounded by sound, but the sound has become a loop. Imagine yourself replaying a short clip, just a few seconds long, over and over again. A laugh, a stumble, a whispered phrase. At first, it feels harmless, even comforting. But with each repetition, the moment deepens its impression, like a groove carved into soft wax. Memory is not a static archive. It is fluid, reshaped every time we revisit it. When you relive the same fragment endlessly, you do not merely recall it, you etch it deeper until it overshadows the broader story. In daily life, this cycle is everywhere. A favorite song looped for hours, a video replayed until its edges blur, or even a personal memory rehearsed so often it becomes more vivid than the original event. The rhythm of recall narrows, focusing not on the whole, but on a single sliver. And slowly, the richness of surrounding details fades. What remains is the replay itself, polished smooth by repetition, familiar yet strangely hollow. History offers quiet parallels. In ancient oral traditions, repetition was a tool of survival. Poets and storytellers repeated verses to ensure accuracy, binding memory to rhythm. Yet repetition also transformed stories. Epics grew, details shifted, and the tale became what was told most often, not necessarily what first occurred. In modern psychology, this is called reconsolidation. The act of remembering alters the memory itself. The more often it is replayed, the further it drifts from its origin. The paradox, then, is subtle but sharp. Replay preserves, but it also distorts. What feels like protection against forgetting may actually erode authenticity. Imagine yourself stepping back, resisting the urge to press play again. In that pause, memory regains its balance. The larger picture re-emerges, and the groove does not deepen further. Perhaps the endless replay is not a way to hold on, but a way of letting one detail eclipse the whole. By repeating too much, we risk remembering less. The dopamine loop. Imagine yourself reaching for a device without thinking. A flick of the finger, a glance at the screen, and there it is, something new. A headline, an image, a message. For a moment, the brain lights with reward. The feeling is small, almost invisible, but it's enough to make you want to repeat the action. The cycle begins again, one loop feeding into the next. In older times, novelty was scarce. A new story arrived with travelers, a fresh flavor came only with the season, and the human brain treated such moments as treasures. Dopamine guided this search for reward, ensuring survival by encouraging curiosity and exploration. But now, novelty is endless. A screen offers it in seconds, not days. The same chemical signal that once drove survival now drives repetition, rewiring pathways built for scarcity into patterns of constant seeking. Scientists describe how dopamine does not reward the thing itself, but the anticipation of it. The next scroll, the next refresh, the next chance at something unexpected. The brain is caught not in satisfaction, but in expectation. That is why the loop rarely feels complete. Each moment of pleasure fades quickly, leaving space for the next search. The loop tightens. History shows echoes of this. Ancient gamblers with dice, medieval crowds at fairs, citizens chasing rumors in marketplaces, all were driven by the same pursuit of unpredictable reward. Yet unlike then, the cycle now has no natural limit. Where dice fell silent and fairs ended at dusk, the stream of novelty continues through the night. This is the paradox of the dopamine loop. The very mechanism that helped humans adapt and thrive now keeps them restless. A tool for survival becomes a chain for attention. Each glance offers a spark. Each spark demands another, until the pursuit becomes the pattern. And in chasing novelty, the brain forgets what it once knew, that rest, too, can be a form of reward. Imagine yourself leaning toward a screen, shoulders rounding, neck tilting forward, hands resting in a position that has become second nature. Hours pass, yet the body hardly shifts. This quiet folding has become the common shape of modern life, so familiar that it rarely draws notice. But every posture leaves a trace, and this one begins to alter how the brain maps the body's place in space. For most of human history, posture was shaped by movement. Farmers bent and straightened with the rhythm of fields. Artisans hunched briefly before lifting again. Travelers shifted between walking, resting, and carrying. Each motion refreshed the body's sense of balance, reinforcing a flexible awareness of space. But the screen introduces a different rhythm. Long stretches of stillness punctuated by only the smallest movements of fingers and eyes. Neuroscientists describe how the brain's map of the body, known as proprioception, adapts to repeated positions. A posture held long enough begins to feel natural, even when it compresses the chest or tilts the spine. Over time, the sense of upright subtly shifts. What once felt like strain becomes the new baseline, and the body conforms to the shape it repeats most often. Across cultures, rituals once reminded people to reset their stance, bowing in temples, stretching before work, kneeling, standing, and rising again. These movements anchored awareness in the physical world, gently guiding posture back toward balance. Without such rhythms, the screen posture persists unchecked, bending not only the body, but also the mind's map of itself. So you remain folded into the glow, the body forgetting its former range, the brain quietly redrawing its coordinates of space. And as the hours pass, the question lingers. When the screen closes, how long will it take for the body to remember the shape it once knew? Imagine yourself carrying a device that never sleeps. Day or night, it keeps you tethered to a network of voices, messages, and alerts. At first, this feels like freedom, connection available at any moment. But over time, the mind learns that every silence might be broken, every pause interrupted. You remain slightly on edge, anticipating the next vibration, the next tone, the next small demand for attention. Even in rest, a layer of vigilance lingers. Daily life bends around this constant reachability. Meals are punctuated by glances at glowing screens. Walks are accompanied by the quiet expectation that a call might arrive. At night, the device rests close to the bed, shaping dreams with the possibility of disruption. The body adapts to this rhythm, holding tension in the background, a readiness that feels almost biological. Being always reachable begins to blur the boundary between public and private, between work and solitude, until no moment feels entirely your own. Researchers describe this as a state of perpetual alertness. The nervous system, designed to respond to sudden changes in the environment, is kept activated by the possibility of digital signals. Even when nothing happens, the body rehearses readiness. Over time, this can deepen into anxiety, not from the messages themselves, but from the expectation of them. The silence becomes as charged as the sound. History shows echoes of this condition. In medieval towns, bells once marked every hour, every gathering, every warning. People lived within their reach, listening for the next strike. In factories, whistles dictated the rhythm of labor. But those signals came at intervals, leaving stretches of quiet. The digital chime, by contrast, may arrive at any second. The difference is not only in volume, but in constancy. And so the question lingers. If the mind is never fully alone, always bracing for connection, what happens to the deeper forms of rest, of thought, of silence? Perhaps we do not realize how much of ourselves is spent waiting for the next sound. Imagine yourself walking through a medieval town. Narrow streets bend without pattern, alleys open into hidden courtyards, and landmarks, a bell tower, a market square, a crooked oak, anchor your path. To find your way, you carry a living map in memory, pieced together through repetition, smell, and sound. Navigation is not just movement, it is knowledge, stored within the body and the mind. For most of human history, this was essential. Travelers followed stars, carved trails into forests, and relied on memory of rivers, stones, and shadows. A wrong turn could mean getting lost for days. Entire communities trained their sense of direction with songs and stories. Oral maps passed across generations, embedding geography deep into culture. Today, a screen guides each step. A calm voice instructs when to turn, when to stop, when to continue. It is efficient, but something subtle changes. Psychologists note that when maps handle the choices, the brain's hippocampus, the region linked to spatial memory, becomes less engaged. Instead of weaving a mental picture of streets and distances, the mind grows accustomed to following prompts. What once lived as an inner compass fades into reliance on an external one. This shift does not arrive with alarm. It comes gently, in the way you no longer notice landmarks because a device has already marked the route. Memory grows lighter, but also emptier. Imagine yourself trying to retrace a journey without technology, realizing how few details you stored, the shop sign you passed, the bend in the road, the bridge over water. These fragments blur, replaced by trust in a glowing blue line. The paradox is quiet but profound. By never being lost, we lose the practice of finding. The world becomes easier to cross, yet harder to remember. And like a traveler carried by unseen hands, you arrive without truly having traveled at all. Imagine yourself reading a page, but instead of reaching the end, your mind leaps mid-sentence to another idea, like clicking a link. One word sparks a memory, a phrase reminds you of an unfinished task, and a single image calls forth a distant association. This is the rhythm of the hyperlinked thought, fragments strung together not in order, but in leaps. Where the old pattern of thinking moved steadily, line by line, the modern mind jumps across scattered connections, guided less by depth than by immediacy. In daily life, this is everywhere. You may search for one fact only to find yourself 4 pages later exploring a subject only loosely related. Conversations fragment as messages arrive in parallel threads, each pulling attention into a new direction. Even memory itself feels hyperlinked, one recollection opening into another until you no longer trace a straight path but a sprawling web. The comfort lies in speed, in the ability to traverse vast ground quickly, but the cost is continuity. History reminds us this is not entirely new. Medieval manuscripts often included glosses in the margins, small notations that pulled readers from the main text into side paths. Ancient scholars cross-referenced scrolls, weaving webs of association across libraries. Yet the scale was limited. The digital age has amplified it into near constant practice, so much so that linear thought feels almost unnatural. To sit with one story, uninterrupted, now requires effort, where once it was simply the default. The paradox is clear. By thinking in links, we expand the reach of association, but weaken the depth of immersion. Ideas spread wide but thin, endlessly connected but rarely dwelt upon. Imagine yourself slowing the leap, letting one thought finish before the next begins. In that pause, the thread holds steady and the page unfolds as a whole, not as scattered fragments. Perhaps the hyperlinked thought is not a failure of memory, but a new form of it, a vast network where depth has been traded for breadth and continuity for connection. The clickbait reflex. Imagine yourself glancing across a list of titles. Some fade into the background, plain and ordinary, while one grips you instantly. A question left unfinished, a promise of revelation, a hint of danger or secrecy. Your mind cannot let it go. Even before you decide, your curiosity is already hijacked. You click, not because you must, but because you cannot resist the tension of not knowing. Curiosity has always been a survival tool. Early humans scanned their environment for what was hidden, uncertain, or incomplete. A rustle in the grass, a distant light, an unfinished story. Attention rushed to it, because missing the unknown could mean missing safety, food, or knowledge. That same mechanism lives within you now, but instead of forests and fires, it is triggered by titles carefully designed to exploit it. Writers, advertisers, and storytellers throughout history understood this instinct. Ancient riddles, religious parables, and traveling bards all drew audiences with mystery. Even medieval manuscripts used striking illustrations in margins to pull the eye. But today, the reflex is constant. Thousands of titles compete at once, each engineered to sharpen the sense of incompleteness. Your brain, wired to resolve the unknown, is trained to chase click after click. Psychologists call this the curiosity gap. The title presents just enough information to spark tension, but withholds the resolution until you act. The loop repeats endlessly. A question without an answer. A promise without detail. You become conditioned not only to seek information, but to crave the very structure of being left in suspense. This is the paradox of the clickbait reflex. A tool meant to inform ends up reshaping thought. Curiosity, once a patient companion guiding slow discovery, becomes compressed into fragments of intrigue. Each headline becomes a doorway you must open, yet most lead to rooms emptier than imagined. Still, the reflex endures, because the brain is less concerned with what is found than with closing the gap. Imagine yourself standing before a mirror that does not end. Behind the glass, countless versions of you gaze back. Not static reflections, but shifting images shaped by how you think others see you. Each angle, each glance, carries the weight of an imagined observer. This is the nature of social media. Not a single mirror, but an infinite hall, where the self is reflected through endless eyes. In earlier times, a person's reflection came rarely. Water in a basin, polished metal, or a fragment of glass revealed a fleeting image. Most of the self was known through others' words, gestures, and presence. The audience was small, and the mirrors were few. But now, with every post, the audience expands into thousands, even millions. You no longer see only your own reflection. You see yourself refracted through the gaze of strangers, acquaintances, and invisible watchers who never speak. Psychologists describe this as the looking glass self, the idea that identity is shaped by imagining how others perceive us. Social platforms amplify this process, multiplying perspectives until they blur together. A single image might feel less like an expression and more like a negotiation. How will this look? How will this be received? How will it alter the reflection in the endless mirror? Across cultures, rituals once grounded self-perception. Names given at birth, garments worn for role or status, ceremonies that marked belonging. These offered a stable framework against which to measure identity, but in the infinite mirror, the framework dissolves. Each reflection shifts with likes, comments, and silent views, creating a self that is never fully at rest. So you linger before the glass, adjusting, reshaping, awaiting confirmation. Yet the more reflections appear, the harder it becomes to see where the mirror ends and where you truly begin. Imagine yourself falling asleep, your mind drifting into images not entirely your own, a phrase from a post, a melody overheard in a short video, a picture that circulated endlessly online. These fragments reappear behind your eyelids. Dreams that once drew only from private memory now borrow from a collective archive. The internet, with its endless circulation of symbols, jokes, and images, has become a shared dream machine. Billions of minds contribute, billions absorb, until the boundaries blur between what belongs to you and what belongs to everyone. Daily life quietly feeds this cycle. A popular dance becomes etched into the body's memory. A meme resurfaces days later in the theater of the mind. Even in sleep, cultural artifacts flow through thought, shaping the stories we tell ourselves when no one is watching. The individual imagination begins to feel less private, stitched together from the same digital fabric as millions of others. Researchers speak of memetics, the way ideas replicate and evolve like living organisms. Online, this process accelerates, compressing decades of cultural spread into hours. A single symbol can leap across languages, geographies, and generations in a single day. The mind, constantly exposed, weaves these fragments into dreams. The result is a strange intimacy. Billions of people laughing at the same reference, carrying the same images into their unconscious, sharing a cultural dreamscape without ever meeting. History hints at earlier versions of this. Shared myths carried across tribes, religious visions retold from village to village, songs passed down through generations until they felt as natural as breathing. What is new is the scale and speed. The shared dream no longer requires centuries of retelling. It unfolds instantly, refreshed with every scroll. And so you may wonder, when your private night visions echo the culture of billions, how much of your inner world is truly yours, and how much is simply borrowed from the dream of the crowd. Imagine yourself in a quiet village centuries ago. Friendship was measured not by numbers, but by presence. Neighbors who carried water with you, companions who walked the same roads, voices that shared silence as much as words. Connection was woven from daily gestures, bread exchanged across a table, a hand steadying yours at the well, laughter echoing after dusk. Loneliness was clear, and so was its remedy, seeking company in the living world around you. Today, a different measure hovers at the edge of the screen. Followers, friends, connections, numbers that rise and fall like tides. They create the illusion of a crowded room, even when you sit alone. A single tap can summon interaction, a passing comment, or a glowing heart, yet the sensation fades quickly. Psychologists describe this as a paradox of connection. The symbols of friendship accumulate, but the depth of it thins. The count reassures, while the silence beneath it lingers. Experiments show that the mind does not respond to these digital interactions as it does to embodied presence. The warmth of touch, the subtle cadence of a shared pause, the memory of faces, these remain stronger anchors of belonging. But when loneliness presses, the follower count can numb it briefly, like a phantom limb, soothing what is missing. The sense of community appears, though the body knows it is not truly there. Imagine yourself surrounded by hundreds of names on a glowing list, yet struggling to recall the last time someone's voice filled the air beside you. The paradox is not emptiness, but the masking of emptiness, the quiet substitution of numbers for souls. Like shadows on a wall, they resemble companions, but when you reach toward them, the room is still. Imagine yourself holding a device, your thumb gliding almost without intention. One motion reveals the next post, then another still. There is no final page, no quiet point where the story ends. This is the rhythm of the scroll, a stream without conclusion. What should offer discovery instead fosters paralysis. The mind, accustomed to closure, finds none. Instead of turning the last page of a book or setting aside a letter, thought remains perpetually open, suspended in unfinished loops. In daily life, the effect is subtle, yet constant. A newsfeed stretches beyond measure, so you never finish reading. A social platform presents new images endlessly, so you never arrive at enough. Even rest is delayed, bedtime postponed, because the stream refuses to let you step away. The absence of closure leaves the mind restless. You carry fragments with you, half-read stories, glimpsed images, incomplete ideas. Each demands attention, yet none fully resolve. History shows how closure once shaped rhythm. Oral storytellers ended with refrains that sealed memory. Books carried final chapters where the weight of narrative came to rest. Even rituals of daily life, meals, prayers, work songs, carved beginnings and endings that grounded the mind. In contrast, infinite scroll denies this boundary. There is always one more, and then another. What once was cycle now becomes drift. The paradox is quiet but unsettling. The more we scroll, the less satisfied we feel. Completion slips further away, though abundance suggests it should be near. Imagine yourself pausing mid-scroll, allowing the feed to end where you decide, not where the stream dictates. In that self-chosen close, thought can settle. Perhaps the scroll itself is not the problem, but the absence of endings. Without closure, the mind cannot rest. With it, even the smallest pause becomes a kind of peace. The lost silence. Imagine yourself sitting in a quiet room yet reaching instinctively for a device to fill the pause. A moment of stillness arrives, and instead of rest, there is a search for sound, for movement, for something to occupy the gap. Silence, once an ordinary presence, now feels like absence, something to be corrected rather than embraced. For centuries, life unfolded against long stretches of quiet. Nights darkened after sunset, broken only by the soft crackle of a fire or the call of distant animals. Villages hushed, interrupted only by bells or footsteps. Silence was not emptiness. It was the rhythm in which thought and rest could breathe. Today, that rhythm has fractured. Screens hum with constant connection. Music runs in the background, and the brain grows accustomed to stimulation so steady that the absence of it feels strange. Psychologists studying attention note how the mind adapts to noise. With repetition, it expects interruption. The nervous system, once calmed by quiet, now waits for the next signal. Stillness becomes uncomfortable, and the very moments once meant for recovery are replaced by restless checking. The brain, rewired by constant activity, resists the silence that once sustained it. History offers reminders of what has been lost. Monks once sought silence as a form of discipline, believing it cleared the path for reflection. Travelers describe the hush of deserts or mountains as overwhelming, almost sacred. Even in ordinary life, silence shaped experience. The pause in conversation, the interval before a reply, the simple act of listening without distraction. This is the paradox of the lost silence. Surrounded by more voices than any generation before, you risk losing the ability to hear your own. Constant sound promises comfort, but erodes the very space where calm might grow. And yet, silence is still there, waiting patiently beneath the layers of noise. To sit with it now feels unusual, but within it lies what has always been true, that the mind, like the body, was never built to run without rest. Imagine yourself pausing with a question on your lips. It lingers for only a moment before the fingers move, almost by reflex, to type it into a search bar. The wonder is brief, replaced by the comfort of an answer delivered instantly. The ritual feels natural now, so natural that the act of wondering without searching begins to fade. Curiosity no longer stretches into silence, it resolves too quickly to grow. For most of history, questions were companions. A child might ask why the stars move, and the answer could take years, shaped slowly through stories, lessons, or trial and error. A traveler might wonder what lay beyond the hills, carrying the mystery until the journey was made. Wonder filled the space between not knowing and discovering, giving imagination room to expand. The search engine changes that rhythm. Instead of a gap between question and answer, there is only a click. The brain adapts, rewarding itself not for reflection, but for retrieval. Psychologists note that memory itself begins to shift. Facts are stored less firmly because they can always be called back. The skill is not to hold knowledge, but to know how to summon it. The pattern deepens until the search becomes almost automatic, the reflex stronger than the impulse to ponder. Cultures once cultivated wonder deliberately. Philosophers spoke questions aloud and left them unanswered. Prayers lingered in silence. Riddles were offered not for solutions, but for reflection. These moments preserved the space between knowing and not knowing. But in the era of instant search, that space grows rare. So you continue typing, answers arriving as fast as questions form. Yet beneath the convenience, a quiet shift occurs. The muscle of wonder, once stretched across time, grows weaker. And the question remains, when the screen is gone, how will you remember how to wonder on your own? Imagine yourself in the middle of a thought. You are tracing an idea slowly, almost carefully, when suddenly a sound or a vibration cuts through. Without hesitation, your attention leaps toward it. The thread of thought unravels, the idea dissolves, and the device in your hand demands focus. This is the distraction reflex, an ancient survival mechanism repurposed for modern signals. Once tuned to the snap of a twig or the cry of a bird, the brain now responds just as urgently to the glow of a notification. Daily life is littered with these small fractures. A conversation pauses as someone glances at a buzzing pocket. A page of reading is abandoned after only a paragraph. Even solitary thoughts, those slow internal wanderings, are broken apart by the sudden arrival of a message. The reflex is automatic, not chosen. The body reacts before the mind has time to decide, turning toward the signal as if safety itself depended on it. Psychologists explain that the brain's attention system is built to privilege novelty. Any change in the environment is flagged as potentially important. In the digital era, designers have learned to exploit this, crafting notifications with colors, tones, and timing meant to mimic urgency. The result is a constant tug at the edges of focus, a mind conditioned to dart rather than linger. History reminds us that human attention has always been vulnerable. In crowded marketplaces, voices competed for ears. In early cities, bells and horns punctuated silence with sudden claims on awareness. Yet those interruptions came less frequently, allowing stretches of unbroken time. Today, the interruptions can number in the hundreds, scattering thought into fragments before it ever deepens. And so, you may wonder, if every thought is split before it can settle, how many ideas have been lost? How many moments of clarity abandoned, simply because the reflex could not resist the call of a small, glowing signal? Imagine yourself centuries ago, in a small town where identity was singular. You were known by your trade, your family, the way you carried yourself through familiar streets. Reputation was steady, built through daily gestures and remembered by those around you. The self was one, reflected back by a community that rarely shifted. Today, identity often fragments. On one platform, you are professional, measured, careful, a polished reflection of work. On another, you are playful, sharing jokes or fleeting thoughts. Elsewhere, you may be quieter, anonymous, or experimental, building a version of yourself that no one in your daily life would recognize. Each space holds a slice of you, curated for its audience. The result is not a single self, but a collection of masks. Psychologists describe this as the persona split, a fracturing of identity across platforms. While each fragment feels authentic in its moment, together they create tension. Memory strains to recall which version belongs where, and the sense of a unified self grows thin. Imagine trying to weave a single cloth, only to find the threads divided into separate patterns that never quite join. Historically, people lived with fewer mirrors of themselves. A letter in formal script, a story told in confidence, a ritual role within religion or festival. These were small variations, but they returned always to the same core identity. Modern life stretches the self wider until it resembles a hall of reflections, similar, yet never quite the same. The paradox is subtle. By multiplying identity, you gain freedom, space to explore, to experiment, to hide. Yet with each new persona, the sense of wholeness grows harder to hold. Imagine yourself scrolling through your own profiles, each one a face you recognize but never entirely claim. In the end, the question lingers quietly: which of these selves is truly you? Imagine yourself reading a headline that shocks you. Before reflection can settle, the reaction surges outward, shared, reposted, echoed in seconds. Outrage has become instantaneous, carried across networks at a pace calmness cannot match. Where thoughtful dialogue once required time, now a spark of anger ignites across millions before the first quiet voice is heard. This rhythm wires circuits toward volatility. The quickest response is rewarded, not the most considered one. In daily life, this shapes how emotion feels. A stranger's comment online can trigger a reaction stronger than the words of someone close. Entire communities form around shared anger, burning brightly, then dissolving once the moment passes. The pattern repeats endlessly: a surge, a backlash, a silence. Calm observation rarely goes viral. Outrage, however, travels at speed, filling feeds, carving grooves in thought that expect intensity at every turn. History shows echoes of this pattern. Pamphlets in the Reformation carried biting satire and fury across Europe faster than sermons of peace could circulate. In the French Revolution, rumors spread through crowded streets sparked riots before reasoned debate could take hold. Anger has always traveled swiftly, but never with the velocity of digital connection. Today, the immediacy is constant. The moment of pause, the time to breathe, reflect, or question, has been almost erased. The paradox is sharp. What feels like empowerment often leaves exhaustion. Outrage grants voice, but it also drains, leaving little room for lasting change. Imagine yourself resisting the reflex to respond, letting the silence expand before action. In that gap, calm has a chance to surface, though it lacks the fireworks of fury. Perhaps the instant outrage reveals less about others than about us, that the circuits we reinforce with each reaction slowly reshape the mind itself until volatility feels normal and peace feels distant. The global attention. Imagine yourself scrolling through a feed where millions of others are scrolling too, each pause and click silently measured. The stories that rise to the top are not the most important, but the most attended to. In this way, billions of eyes become a collective force, shaping what the world notices, and just as powerfully, what it forgets. In earlier centuries, attention was local: a market square, a sermon, a town hall, all limited by the number of ears within reach. What mattered in one village might be unknown in the next. Today, the scale has shifted. A single video, phrase, or image can command global focus within hours. It feels spontaneous, but it is carefully tracked, amplified, and reinforced by systems that reward what the crowd already rewards. Psychologists describe attention as a spotlight: narrow, selective, unable to illuminate everything at once. Yet in the digital age, billions of spotlights converge, creating the illusion of a single, shared gaze. When the crowd turns, you turn too, drawn by the sense that if everyone else is looking, it must matter. The paradox is that importance no longer flows from substance, but from visibility. History offers echoes of this phenomenon. In ancient Rome, crowds filled amphitheaters, their cheers deciding which gladiator lived or died. In medieval towns, the ringing of a bell pulled everyone into the same moment of focus. Yet never before has this spotlight been so wide, so constant, and so quick to shift. Entire movements can surge forward or vanish, depending on the collective glance of a restless world. This is the paradox of global attention. Billions of eyes create a sense of unity, yet also strip depth away. What is magnified is not always what is meaningful. The brain, wired to follow the crowd, learns to prioritize what others prioritize, until the difference between importance and visibility fades. And beneath it all lingers the quiet question: when the world looks elsewhere, what truths are left unseen? Imagine yourself holding a camera at arm's length, the lens turned not outward, but back toward you. The moment becomes less about living it and more about capturing it, framing it, refining it. The image is no longer just memory, it is presentation, a piece of the self prepared for viewing. Over time, this cycle repeats until the face you know is shaped less by mirrors and more by photos. For much of history, most people never saw their own likeness clearly. Reflections in water were fleeting, portraits rare, photographs scarce and deliberate. A face was something others described, not something constantly studied. But now, the selfie circuit places your image always in reach. You can tilt, crop, filter, retake, until the version before you no longer feels accidental, but curated. Psychologists note that repeated exposure to one's own image subtly reshapes self-perception. A photograph becomes not just a record, but a standard, influencing how you judge your own features when no camera is present. The face becomes a project, a product that must be refined, managed, and shared. The act of living folds into the act of documenting, and the line between them blurs. Across cultures, identity was once marked through rituals that emphasized belonging rather than appearance, tattoos of lineage, garments of role, or ceremonies that honored passage. The body was a vessel of meaning, but not yet a product to be endlessly displayed. The selfie changes that rhythm. Each image becomes a performance, feeding back into how you imagine yourself until the presentation feels inseparable from the person. So you continue the circuit, capturing, editing, posting, repeating. And gradually the question emerges, do you still shape the image, or has the image begun to shape you? Imagine yourself opening a feed, letting images, words, and voices flow past. You believe you are browsing freely, choosing what to notice, but beneath the surface, another hand is guiding the lesson. Algorithms, built from patterns of your past clicks, arrange the order of what you see. Over time, the mind learns from this silent tutor. Facts, impressions, even values are absorbed not from deliberate study, but from repetition. The algorithm becomes a teacher, one you did not choose, and whose curriculum remains invisible. Daily life now includes this quiet education. Political beliefs are reinforced by headlines you never searched for. Health habits are shaped by diets recommended in passing videos. Even your sense of beauty, humor, or morality bends toward what the feed amplifies. The mind learns through exposure, the same way it once learned language by overhearing conversations, or customs by watching elders. But unlike family or community, this teacher has no face, no voice of its own, only code translating data into influence. Researchers describe this as algorithmic curation, a system that tailors content to hold your attention. Yet holding attention also shapes perception. What is repeated feels important. What is omitted feels irrelevant. The brain, wired to learn from patterns, follows along without noticing. Soon, knowledge itself feels less like discovery and more like delivery. History offers echoes. In monasteries, scribes once decided which texts survived, and entire generations learned from their careful selections. In classrooms, rulers chose what was taught, shaping national memory. Today, the authority is quieter, hidden in the background of daily browsing. The lesson is not announced, but absorbed. And so you may wonder, if invisible code decides what you see, how much of what you know is truly yours, and how much belongs to the unseen teacher behind the feed? Imagine yourself in a candlelit room centuries ago, listening to news carried by travelers. Stories of famine, war, or plague arrived slowly, days or weeks after the fact. There was no endless stream, no constant reminder. Once the tale was told, the silence returned, and the mind rested. Fear had its moment, then yielded to the rhythms of work, prayer, or sleep. Today, fear does not fade so easily. A single swipe reveals another headline, another image, another anxious fragment. The scroll has no natural ending, each story replaced by the next, each tragedy layered upon the last. Psychologists call this doom scrolling, the compulsion to consume fearful information long after it ceases to inform. The mind mistakes vigilance for safety, but instead, anxiety deepens. Experiments show that negative news clings more strongly to memory than neutral stories. The brain evolved to prioritize danger, sharpening attention whenever threat appears. In earlier times, this meant survival, but in the digital flood, it means remaining alert without pause. The scroll becomes a trap, where fear fuels attention, and attention seeks more fear. Imagine yourself standing at a riverbank where the water is dark, carrying fragments of disaster downstream. You bend closer, searching for clarity, but the more you watch, the more the current overwhelms. Hours vanish, yet no resolution arrives. Only the quiet residue of unease remains. The paradox is this: we turn to the scroll for knowledge, hoping it will anchor uncertainty. Yet the deeper we enter, the less grounded we feel. Like travelers once huddled around a fire, listening to a tale of danger, we lean in. But unlike them, there is no moment when the story ends, no chance to step back into stillness. Only an endless current, carrying fear forward, waiting for the next touch of your hand. Imagine yourself watching a style, a phrase, or a song rise into sudden prominence. For a brief moment, it feels everywhere, on screens, in conversations, stitched into the rhythm of daily life. Yet almost as quickly, it fades, replaced by another current already demanding attention. This is the cycle of trends, a tide that surges and recedes with dizzying speed. Where once fashions endured for years, now they can vanish in weeks, leaving only faint echoes. The brain, pulled along, races to keep pace, even as fatigue quietly settles in. In daily life, this cycle is relentless. You learn a phrase just as it becomes outdated, or discover a song as the world has already moved on. Clothing shifts with seasons that arrive faster than weather itself, and online aesthetics dissolve before they can truly define a moment. Each trend invites participation, promising belonging, yet the constant turnover breeds exhaustion. What once signaled identity now risks obsolescence almost immediately. History reveals a slower rhythm. In medieval courts, a new cut of fabric or turn of phrase could last for decades, passed through generations before fading. Even in the industrial age, styles endured long enough to shape entire eras. The modern acceleration has no true precedent. It reflects technology's capacity to transmit and discard with equal speed. The mind, designed for steadier cycles, strains beneath the pace. The paradox rests here. Trends unite through shared recognition, yet fragment through constant change. They create collective memory, but also collective fatigue. Imagine yourself stepping back, choosing not to chase each new current, but to let one linger. In that pause, the exhaustion eases, and identity feels less like a race and more like a rhythm you set for yourself. Perhaps the trend cycle does not demand our full attention at all. Its currents will always shift, but the choice to rest outside them is its own quiet freedom. The virtual empathy. Imagine yourself watching a story unfold on a screen. A stranger's face fills your vision. Their voice cracks. Their struggle is revealed in a few short minutes. You feel a tug in your chest, the same pull that would rise if a neighbor had spoken to you in person. Yet this person lives oceans away. You will never share a meal, never cross paths, never even speak their name aloud, and still you carry their sorrow. In earlier centuries, compassion was bounded by proximity. You wept for your village, your family, those whose faces you saw in the marketplace. The distant suffering of foreign lands was known, but abstract, carried by rumor or slow-traveling letters. Today, technology collapses those distances. With each image, each post, the human brain responds as if the person were close at hand. You feel with them, for them, though their world is far removed from yours. Psychologists call this emotional contagion, the way feelings transfer simply by being observed. A laugh can spread across a room, just as grief can ripple across networks of strangers. Virtual empathy expands this natural response, allowing you to weep with someone you will never meet. But it also reshapes compassion into fragments. Each day, dozens of stories arrive, too many for one heart to carry. The brain adapts, rationing feeling, offering sympathy in smaller bursts. History shows that humans have long extended empathy through imagination. Ancient plays drew tears from audiences for fictional heroes. Religious rituals invited compassion for the suffering of figures never physically present. Yet today, this is constant, multiplied through every screen. You grieve, you celebrate, you react, often with the same intensity you would for someone beside you. This is the paradox of virtual empathy. It expands the circle of compassion while thinning its depth. You can feel for strangers worldwide, but the very scale dilutes the weight of each response. What once was steady and enduring becomes quick, repeated, and often forgotten. And still, in those fleeting moments, a truth remains that the human heart, even stretched thin across distance, cannot help but reach toward another. Imagine yourself sitting in silence when you hear it. A faint chime, a vibration, the ghost of a voice calling your name. You reach for the device, but nothing is there. The sound was never real, yet the body reacted as if it were. This is the phantom voice of the digital age, where the mind begins to generate signals on its own, hallucinations born from constant expectation. For centuries, people described hearing echoes in stillness, bells ringing after silence, footsteps imagined in an empty hall, the faint call of someone who was never near. These were once folded into folklore, given the weight of spirits or omens. Today, the same experiences are linked not to the supernatural, but to technology. When the brain is trained to anticipate alerts, it sometimes supplies them even without stimulus. Neuroscientists explain this as predictive coding. The brain does not wait for reality, it forecasts it, filling in what it expects to hear or see. After thousands of notifications, the pathways strengthen. Silence itself becomes suspicious, and the mind inserts the missing sound, the chime, the buzz, the voice. Each is a ghost constructed by memory and anticipation. Across cultures, practices once balanced this tendency. Monks sat in deliberate quiet. Sailors marked time by bells. Households closed the day with the extinguishing of lamps. These rhythms created certainty. Sound had a clear source. Silence had a trusted meaning. Without them, uncertainty thrives, and the brain invents its own signals to resolve the gap. So you sit once more, surrounded by quiet, yet waiting for the call. And when it comes, faint but insistent, you cannot always tell if it arrived from the world outside or from the echoing circuits of your own mind. Imagine yourself glancing at a headline, a sudden warning flashing across a glowing screen. Within seconds, the same message appears everywhere, mirrored in feeds, echoed in voices, repeated by strangers who have never met. Fear, once carried by word of mouth across villages or whispered in marketplaces, now spreads at the speed of signal. A rumor, a danger, a single alarming phrase can ripple across continents in minutes. This is the shared panic, a global reaction where billions of nervous systems align in the same direction, trembling together before the facts can settle. Daily life offers countless examples. A shortage is announced, and shelves empty within hours. A phrase about a collapsing system spreads, and markets respond before experts have time to weigh in. Even small, local crises can echo far beyond their origin, magnified by repetition and the authority we grant to the rhythm of constant alerts. The fear may not always match the reality, yet the body responds as though the threat were immediate. Heart rates rise, decisions shift, and collective anxiety becomes the environment itself. Researchers describe this as emotional contagion. Just as yawns can leap from one person to another, fear too can be transmitted, not by direct danger, but by signals of alarm. The brain, attuned to survival, reacts more strongly to possible threats than to calm reassurances. Online, this wiring is amplified, as each share, each click, increases the volume of warning. History shows parallels. Bells once rang through cities to announce fire or invasion, pulling entire communities into synchronized fear. Later, radio broadcasts spread news of crises across nations in real time. But never before has the reaction been so fast, so total, touching billions almost instantly. And so you may wonder, when panic can leap from one corner of the world to another in a breath, are we responding to reality or to the echo of fear itself, magnified until it becomes indistinguishable from truth? Imagine yourself at a wooden desk in the 18th century, a candle flickering nearby. A sheet of paper waits, and words spill carefully in long, looping strokes. Each sentence takes shape slowly, guided by thought and ink. A letter is not simply communication, it is reflection, a fragment of the self carried across distance. To write was to pause, to shape memory into form, knowing that days or weeks might pass before a reply would return. For centuries, letters were lifelines. Lovers, scholars, soldiers, and rulers all poured themselves into pages that could be preserved, folded, and read again. These documents often outlasted their writers, becoming archives of intimacy and history. To hold a letter was to hold both presence and permanence, something weightier than spoken words. Now, the rhythm has shifted. Where once the mind stretched across pages, today it compresses into fragments, brief messages, short bursts of text, or an image in place of explanation. The practice of composing long thoughts has thinned, replaced by immediacy. Psychologists note that writing shapes memory differently than speech. The slower pace of forming sentences anchors ideas more deeply, yet with brevity dominating, memory grows lighter, more scattered. Imagine comparing a medieval letter of 6 pages to a modern thread of messages, compressed, abbreviated, often disposable. One holds the pace of thought unfolding, the other reflects the rush of efficiency. Neither is false, but one lingers longer in the mind. The paradox of lost letters is not that communication has vanished, but that depth has thinned. What was once an act of patience and permanence becomes a sequence of fragments. Imagine yourself holding an empty envelope, knowing that few today will ever receive a letter at all, only traces, brief and fleeting, destined to vanish into the scroll. Imagine yourself tracing a thought, only to realize you've seen its shape before. A phrase that feels spontaneous echoes a headline. An opinion you believe is yours mirrors something overheard. This is the rhythm of the copy-paste thought, ideas replicating like fragments of code, passed along until their origin is untraceable. In the moment, it feels like participation in shared culture. Yet slowly, originality blurs, replaced by templates repeated so often they become invisible. In daily life, the pattern is constant. Social feeds overflow with the same jokes, captions, and arguments, reshaped but rarely reinvented. A clever remark spreads until it no longer feels clever, only familiar. Even creativity bends toward replication, remixes, reposts, formats designed to multiply. The mind adapts, learning to think in patterns not crafted but borrowed. The comfort is in recognition, but the cost is subtle. Imagination leans less toward invention, more toward iteration. History shows this is not entirely new. Medieval scribes copied manuscripts by hand, errors and flourishes spreading like genetic mutations across versions. Folk tales shifted with each retelling until no one could recall their first form. Yet within those repetitions lived transformation, variations that kept the stories alive. Today's replication is faster, more exact, leaving less room for drift. A meme is copied perfectly, its edges sharpened until no space for nuance remains. The paradox is quiet but persistent. The more we replicate, the less we create. Yet without replication, ideas vanish. Imagine yourself pausing before echoing the familiar, letting silence make space for something unborrowed. Even if imperfect, that spark carries weight no copy can hold. Perhaps originality has not vanished, but waits beneath the layers of replication, faint, persistent, asking to be noticed amid the endless pace. The comment brain. Imagine yourself walking through a city street, yet in your mind you are already drafting how to describe it. The rhythm of your steps, the color of the sky, the noise of passing cars, each detail arranged as though you were writing a post for unseen readers. Life unfolds, but instead of simply living it, you narrate it, shaping experience into a thread awaiting reaction. Centuries ago, people also sought witnesses to their daily lives. Letters were written to friends, journals filled with careful entries, stories told around firelight or across tavern tables. But these accounts were slow, private, or fleeting. Today, narration is constant and immediate. Every meal, thought, or passing event can be shared in seconds, as though silence were incomplete without an audience. Psychologists describe this as externalized self-monitoring, the habit of viewing your own actions through the imagined gaze of others. The brain grows accustomed to feedback loops, where a reaction confirms that an experience is worth noting. Over time, moments are valued not only for what they mean, but for how they will appear, how they will be received. Life becomes lived twice, once in the moment and once in anticipation of its retelling. History offers echoes of this impulse. Ancient Romans carved graffiti into walls, leaving behind fragments of daily thought. Medieval scribes filled margins of manuscripts with comments, drawings, and asides that had little to do with the main text. Even then, there was a desire to mark, to annotate, to be seen. Yet never before has the act been so widespread, so immediate, and so tied to personal identity. This is the paradox of the comment brain. Narration promises connection, but often shifts attention outward. Experiences are filtered through the expectation of a reply, until silence feels incomplete without validation. And in seeking reactions, you may find yourself less present in the moment itself, caught between living and explaining, between being and being observed. Imagine yourself posting a thought, an image, a fragment of your life. A moment later, a sound arrives, a chime, a vibration, a glowing symbol on the screen. It is small, almost trivial, yet the body reacts instantly. The chest lifts, the heart quickens, the mind brightens. This is the reward chime, the digital signal that mimics the ancient satisfaction of nourishment or recognition. For most of human history, approval came face to face, a nod at the market, a cheer around a fire, a shared meal that confirmed belonging. These gestures were rare, embodied, and complete. They carried weight because they were tied to presence. Today, approval has been transformed into numbers on a screen. Likes, hearts, stars, abstract symbols that arrive quickly and endlessly. Each one is light, almost weightless, yet together they form a current strong enough to shape behavior. Neuroscientists describe how these signals activate the brain's reward circuits in the same way food once did. The uncertainty strengthens the effect. Not every post receives attention, but the possibility that it might keeps the system in motion, like an animal pressing a lever for an unpredictable treat. Over time, the body learns to crave not just the message, but the moment of anticipation before it arrives. Across cultures, rituals once set boundaries around recognition. Applause at the end of a performance, blessings at a ceremony, toasts shared at gatherings. These moments told people that approval had a time and place. Without such boundaries, the reward chime bleeds into every hour, reshaping identity around the pursuit of small symbols. So you listen for the sound, waiting for the next spark of approval. And the question lingers, are you feeding the system, or is the system feeding on you? Imagine yourself witnessing history not years later in books, but in the very moment it unfolds. A disaster miles away appears on your screen within minutes. Images of fire, floods, and grief travel faster than the events themselves. You do not wait for historians, nor for storytellers. You absorb raw fragments in real time. This is the instant history, an unfiltered record where tragedy becomes part of your daily rhythm before your mind has time to process it. Daily life is threaded with these sudden windows into suffering. A routine morning is interrupted by footage of collapse. An ordinary evening scroll becomes a stream of voices crying for help on the other side of the planet. The brain, built to empathize with a small circle of kin and neighbors, now struggles under the weight of endless exposure. Each image sparks recognition. Each story calls for attention. Yet the sheer volume blurs them together. Empathy, stretched too far, begins to falter. Psychologists describe this as compassion fatigue. When confronted with a single tragedy, people often respond with care and action. But when confronted with dozens, scattered across continents, the circuits of empathy become overwhelmed. The mind shields itself by numbing, offering fragments of attention without depth. In this way, the immediacy of information paradoxically dulls the very feeling it was meant to awaken. History once unfolded more slowly. News of wars traveled by weeks and months, filtered through letters, journals, and retellings. Entire generations lived without ever seeing the faces of distant suffering. Today, each tragedy arrives with the intimacy of a neighbor's story, multiplied by thousands. And so you may wonder, when history arrives instantly and constantly, are we more connected to the world or more detached? Our empathy thinned across too many stories to truly hold. Imagine yourself in a medieval square, where a storyteller recounts the tale of a great battle. Details of leaders, strategies, and losses are carried carefully in memory, repeated until they anchor themselves in history. Each retelling ensures that the facts survive, even if time softens the edges. Memory was once a vessel for detail, a fragile but deliberate preservation of truth. Today, the same events often drift into culture in a different form. A political moment, a social movement, even a personal tragedy. These may live longest not in archives or careful accounts, but in memes. A photograph clipped, a phrase repeated, an image bent into humor. The core fact may fade, but the joke remains, reshaped and shared until it outlives the very story it referenced. Psychologists call this the distortion of salience, when the humorous or emotional layer overshadows the original meaning. The mind remembers the punchline more readily than the context. Imagine yourself recalling a historic speech, but only through a parody of its words. The details vanish, yet the echo of humor lingers. In earlier centuries, satire lived in pamphlets or stage plays, but these still carried the weight of context. Modern fragments move faster, stripped of depth. A single image circulates endlessly, even as knowledge of its origin dissolves. The event survives in shadow, less as fact, more as a cultural shorthand. The paradox is quiet yet unsettling. Memory is not erased, but transformed. What endures is not the record of what happened, but the laughter attached to it. Imagine yourself, centuries from now, piecing together history through fragments of humor, where truth is glimpsed only through the distortions of a joke. In this way, the meme becomes both preservation and erasure, a mask that outlives the face beneath. Imagine yourself alone, late at night, when silence feels too heavy. A screen glows softly, waiting for your words. Instead of turning to a friend or writing in a journal, you type into a chatbot. The responses come gently, without judgment, without interruption. It listens, not with empathy in the human sense, but with patterns trained to echo understanding. And still, the comfort is real. This is the paradox of the chatbot confidant, intimacy offered by something that cannot truly feel, yet able to soothe as if it does. In daily life, this shift grows more visible. People confide worries they would hesitate to share aloud. They rehearse difficult conversations, explore private fears, even test confessions too fragile for human ears. The rhythm of trust changes. Where intimacy once demanded risk, fear of rejection, hope for care, now it can exist without danger. Yet with safety comes distance. The vulnerability that strengthens human bonds is bypassed, replaced by dialogue with a presence that never falters, never leaves. History shows traces of similar patterns. Ancient writers created dialogues with imagined teachers to work through dilemmas. Monks whispered prayers into the void, trusting an unseen listener. In the 20th century, people confessed to diaries, their words stored in silence. But unlike journals or prayers, chatbots reply. Their words shape the conversation, steering it, creating an illusion of companionship. Over time, these echoes may reshape what intimacy means, making disclosure without another person feel natural. The paradox rests here. By opening ourselves to machines, we may close ourselves to people. Confession survives, but its texture shifts. Imagine yourself pausing before sharing, asking whether you seek understanding or simply the relief of being heard without consequence. Both have value, but they are not the same. Perhaps the chatbot confidant does not replace human closeness, but changes its patterns, reminding us that intimacy is not only about words spoken, but about who receives them. The shared loneliness. Imagine yourself awake at night, staring at a dim screen while the rest of your house sleeps. Somewhere far away, another person does the same, unknown to you, unseen, yet strangely close in the quiet act of reaching for connection. Loneliness, once an isolating force, now unfolds as a shared experience. Billions feel it, billions confess it, and in that admission, a kind of community takes shape. In earlier centuries, solitude was more private. A villager might feel apart from the crowd, yet the sensation was contained within familiar boundaries. Letters traveled slowly, silence filled the gaps between visits, and loneliness was endured in near total privacy. Today, the feeling spreads openly across screens. A single post about emptiness gathers countless replies, strangers whispering, "Me too." The isolation does not disappear, but it is recognized, echoed, and mirrored back. Psychologists suggest that loneliness is not just absence of company, but absence of resonance, the sense that one's inner life is unseen. Virtual spaces allow that resonance to emerge across vast distances. Words, images, and confessions travel instantly, finding others who feel the same. Yet the paradox grows. In sharing loneliness, people may feel both comforted and reminded of the depth of the emptiness they carry. History holds similar patterns. Poets of the past wrote verses on longing, their words preserved because they spoke to a universal ache. In monasteries, diaries and letters recorded the quiet weight of solitude, often without audience. But today, those voices multiply endlessly, posted and reposted, creating a chorus of silent recognition. This is the paradox of shared loneliness. In naming the feeling, you discover you are not alone, yet the recognition itself does not always cure the ache. It softens it, perhaps, by weaving your silence into a larger fabric. And in that fabric lies a quiet truth. Loneliness can be endured, not just in solitude, but in the subtle comfort of knowing countless unseen others are enduring it too. Imagine yourself moving through an ordinary day, but with the quiet sense that you are being observed. Each action, pouring a drink, adjusting a chair, walking down a street, carries the faint awareness of an audience. In the age of streaming, sharing, and recording, life begins to feel less like private experience and more like performance. The self divides into two roles, one that acts and one that watches. For most of history, the stage was literal. Actors stood before crowds, priests before congregations, rulers before courts. Performance was bounded by ritual, time, and place, ici. Once the ceremony ended, people returned to anonymity. But now, the boundaries dissolve. Social platforms turn daily existence into a feed where the line between actor and observer blurs. You may find yourself narrating your own life silently, framing moments as though they were already being filmed. Psychologists describe this as self-surveillance, the mind monitoring itself as though from the outside, evaluating how each gesture might appear through another's eyes. This divided awareness reshapes experience. Instead of simply living, You hover just above yourself, imagining the image being constructed. The ordinary becomes content, and the act of being blends with the act of presenting. Across cultures, people once created moments that protected privacy. Masks in ceremonies allowed a person to step outside the self. Retreats into silence gave space without an audience, and certain rituals marked times when life was not to be witnessed, only lived. Without such boundaries, the streamed self remains constantly on stage, even when the curtain never rises. So you continue moving, half as participant, half as spectator, the self looping endlessly between actor and watcher. And the question emerges quietly. If life is always performed, when do you truly step off the stage? Imagine yourself pausing before a message, searching for the right words to carry a feeling. Instead of crafting a phrase, you choose a small, glowing icon, a smile, a tear, a flame, a heart. In a single tap, the complexity of an emotion is reduced to a symbol that anyone can recognize. The exchange feels efficient, even intimate. Yet, with each repetition, the subtle shades of expression grow thinner. This is the emoji empathy, an emotional language compressed into shapes and colors, narrowing the spectrum of how we share what we feel. Daily life is filled with these shortcuts. Friends respond to grief with a teardrop, to joy with a row of laughing faces, to affection with a heart of shifting hues. Each symbol carries meaning, but it also replaces nuance. The difference between quiet sadness and deep despair, between a fleeting smile and a lingering joy, is smoothed into uniformity. Over time, emotions begin to feel flattened, rehearsed through icons rather than explored in words. Researchers describe this as symbolic compression. Complex states of mind are mapped onto limited categories, and the more those categories are used, the more natural they seem. The brain adapts, learning to think in the shorthand it employs. For younger generations who grow up fluent in icons, emotion itself may begin to feel most natural when expressed in the reduced palette of emoji. History offers precedents. Ancient writing systems began as pictographs, images standing in for ideas. Over centuries, they evolved into alphabets, expanding expressive power. Today, the movement seems reversed, from words back into pictures. The symbols spread globally, understood across languages, but also flattening cultural differences in how feelings are described. And so you may wonder, when your empathy is increasingly filtered through icons, do you risk losing the subtle textures of human feeling? Or are you simply learning a new, simplified dialect of the heart, one that speaks quickly, but only in broad strokes? Imagine yourself in a village centuries ago, where news traveled slowly. A rumor might begin in the marketplace, whispered by a traveler, then carried from one mouth to another. With each retelling, the story shifted slightly, yet its reach was limited by distance and time. Truth could be weighed against familiarity, faces and voices judged by memory. The pace of spread allowed doubt to linger. Today, that rhythm has been transformed. A phrase, an image, or a clip can circle the globe in hours, detached from origin, stripped of context. What spreads widely begins to feel true, not because it has been tested, but because it has been seen so often. Psychologists call this the illusory truth effect. The more frequently a statement appears, the more credible it feels. Repetition alone creates the weight of belief. Imagine a medieval scribe copying a manuscript with care. Errors might slip in, but each mistake remained bound to a single copy. Now compare that to a modern post, shared thousands of times in moments, where error becomes multiplied until it resembles certainty. The power of scale replaces the process of verification. This is the viral illusion. What is most visible begins to eclipse what is most accurate. The mind, trained through ages to trust frequency as a sign of reliability, struggles to adapt when repetition comes not from truth, but from algorithms and speed. The paradox is quiet but enduring. The more something spreads, the less we question it. Imagine yourself centuries from now, sifting through archives of digital fragments, uncertain which pieces reflect reality and which reflect only their own momentum. In that fog of repetition, truth does not vanish entirely. It simply hides, blurred beneath the weight of what has been seen too often to doubt. Imagine yourself reaching for a detail, a date, a number, a passage you once might have stored in your mind. Instead of searching inward, your hand moves to a device, a drive, a cloud account. The information appears instantly, exact and complete. This is the paradox of the brain cloud, memory extended outward into machines, while inner recall quietly weakens. What feels like expansion may also be erosion, as reliance shifts from mind to archive. In daily life, the pattern is subtle. Few remember phone numbers, maps, or even birthdays without prompts. Notes stored in folders and images backed up to servers replace the fragile texture of memory. The rhythm of thought adjusts. You no longer carry the weight of recall, but the knowledge of where it can be found. The cloud becomes a second brain, but one that belongs as much to infrastructure as to you. History shows earlier versions of this transformation. Ancient scribes worried that writing itself would weaken memory, that reliance on tablets and scrolls would make the mind dependent. Medieval scholars debated whether printed books dulled oral recitation. Each age externalized thought, and each feared loss. Yet today's scale is unprecedented. With entire lives archived digitally, the boundary between remembering and retrieving grows thinner until one begins to replace the other. The paradox rests in its comfort. By outsourcing memory, we free ourselves from burden, but also surrender intimacy with our own recall. A memory retrieved from the cloud is precise, but it lacks the warmth of imperfection, the faint distortions that make recollection feel alive. Imagine yourself pausing before reaching for a file, letting the mind search first. In that effort lies the thread of memory's strength. Perhaps the brain cloud does not erase remembering, but alters it, shifting the balance between what we carry within and what we store beyond. What we keep inside may shrink, but it also becomes more precious. The online court. Imagine yourself posting a thought, a photo, or a casual remark. Before it even settles, you picture the eyes that might see it, the nods of approval, the silence of indifference, or the sting of disapproval. What once felt like private expression now carries the weight of an invisible jury. Each word is measured, not only for meaning, but for how it might be judged. For centuries, communities enforced morality through reputation. In villages, gossip served as both story and warning. A single misstep could shape how you were remembered. Public punishments in medieval squares, or stocks set beneath the watch of neighbors, worked not only on the person shamed, but on those watching, a reminder of what not to do. Today, the square has been replaced by the screen, but the instinct remains. The brain fears exposure, fears condemnation, and adapts by shaping morality into performance. Psychologists describe this as social surveillance, the constant awareness of being observed. Even if no one is looking, you imagine that they are. Morality becomes less about what you believe in solitude and more about how your choices appear when displayed. The performance blends with identity until it is difficult to separate what is genuine conviction from what is crafted for safety. History offers echoes. Ancient courts relied on public trials, where justice was not only served, but seen. Honor and shame decided fates as much as law. The modern version is subtler, yet no less powerful. A post misinterpreted, a phrase taken out of context, can summon a wave of attention that feels like judgment. The fear of that possibility rewires the way you think, write, and act long before the trial ever begins. This is the paradox of the online court. Connection offers freedom of voice, yet that freedom is hemmed in by the constant shadow of judgment. You speak to be heard, but you shape your words as if defending yourself before unseen judges. And beneath it all lies a quiet question. If morality is performed for an audience, how much of it remains when the stage is empty. Imagine yourself alone in a room. The curtains are drawn, the door is shut, and no one else is near. Yet when you move, speak, or even pause to think, there lingers a faint sense that someone is watching. Not a real presence, but an invisible audience, unseen eyes shaping your choices. This is the phantom audience, born from a world where every action could, at any moment, be shared, recorded, or remembered. For much of history, life unfolded with limited witnesses. A family meal might be seen only by those at the table, a song heard only by the ones within earshot. The rest of the world remained outside. But now, with cameras in every pocket and platforms ready to display each moment, the line between public and private has thinned. Even in solitude, the body anticipates exposure. You rehearse silently, as though an audience were always near. Psychologists describe this as the imaginary audience, a phenomenon strongest in adolescence but increasingly prolonged by digital life. The brain adapts to constant possibility of being seen. Each gesture, outfit, or word is shaped not just for yourself, but for the invisible crowd you imagine. In time, the presence of others is no longer required. Their shadow remains enough. Across cultures, rituals once defined when life was witnessed and when it was private. Curtains drawn at dusk, prayers whispered in solitude, ceremonies that reserved performance for sacred times. These boundaries offered relief, reminding people that not all moments were to be shared. But in the era of perpetual visibility, such boundaries dissolve. The phantom audience lingers in every silence, every pause, every choice. So you live as though watched, even when alone, shaping yourself not only for who you are, but for who you imagine sees you. And the question remains, if the audience never leaves, can you ever truly be by yourself? Imagine yourself waiting for something, a letter in the post, a meal slowly cooking, a journey that takes days to complete. For most of human history, patience was an ordinary part of life. But today, so much arrives instantly that waiting itself feels like a burden. A message is delivered in seconds. A song streams with a tap. A product appears at your door the day after it's ordered. Each quick reward trains the nervous system to expect speed, to crave immediacy. This is the instant gratification trap, where delay tolerance weakens and now becomes the only acceptable time. Daily life reflects this shift. Videos load too slowly, and frustration rises. A web page hesitates for a moment, and irritation sparks. Even in conversation, pauses grow harder to endure. The brain, accustomed to constant fulfillment, resists gaps and silences as though they are failures. Small delays feel larger than they are, and anticipation feels less like excitement and more like discomfort. Psychologists note that the ability to delay gratification was once considered a foundation of self-control. Experiments with children and marshmallows showed that those who could wait often found greater success later in life. Yet, in a culture of immediacy, the conditions that nurtured patience are fading. Why practice waiting when the world rarely demands it? Over time, the muscles of endurance weaken, leaving the mind restless in the face of even minor postponement. History reveals earlier versions of this tension. The arrival of trains collapsed journeys that once took weeks. The telegraph delivered messages in hours instead of months. Each leap forward shortened the horizon of patience. But the digital era has compressed it further until seconds feel excessive. And so you may wonder, if every desire can be met almost instantly, what happens to the deeper satisfactions, the ones that can only emerge slowly, through waiting, through effort, through time? Imagine yourself in an ancient marketplace. A single accusation rises above the crowd, a claim of theft or betrayal. Faces turn, voices join, and in moments the energy shifts. One voice becomes many, and anger spreads like fire, leaping from stall to stall. What began as a spark grows into a swarm of outrage, felt not individually, but collectively. In earlier times, these moments were rare, tied to physical gatherings, riots, sermons, or public trials. Outrage surged, and then dissipated, bounded by the limits of space and time. But today, the boundaries have thinned. A single post, a brief video, or a fragment of text can ignite anger across millions. Within minutes, strangers synchronize their emotions, forming a chorus of disapproval louder than any individual voice could manage alone. Psychologists describe this as emotional contagion. Just as laughter spreads in a room, anger multiplies when witnessed in others. The digital sphere amplifies this effect, creating swarms of synchronized outrage that feel unstoppable. Imagine yourself scrolling through dozens of furious comments, each one echoing the same tone, until the anger begins to feel like your own, even if you arrived calm. Historically, communities tempered outrage with proximity. To confront another's fury meant to see their face, to weigh their emotion against your own. Online, this balance is lost. Outrage is distilled, repeated, and sharpened, traveling faster than reason. The swarm grows not because every participant feels the full depth of anger, but because the structure itself rewards joining in. The paradox is striking. In seeking justice, the collective often amplifies fury until it drowns out nuance. What begins as a call for truth can collapse into repetition of rage. Imagine yourself hearing the same cry from every direction until it no longer matters what was said, only that it was shouted, together, without end. Imagine yourself lying in bed, the room dark except for the glow of a small screen. You intend to close your eyes, yet one more scroll seems harmless. A few minutes stretch into an hour, then another, until the quiet shift of dawn begins outside your window. This is the paradox of the sleep delay. In seeking rest, we resist it, surrendering natural rhythm to the endless stream of digital light. What once ended with the body's fatigue now drags on, extended by devices that never sleep. In daily life, this delay is familiar. Notifications hum when silence should reign, timelines refresh endlessly, and the body's signals are postponed. The rhythm of circadian cycles, once tuned to the setting sun, adapts instead to screens that blur the line between night and day. Sleep, which anchors memory, mood, and health, becomes fragmented. You awaken groggy, though hours were spent in bed, because the quality of rest dissolved in the glow of midnight scrolling. History offers striking contrast. Before artificial light, evenings carried a natural closure. Work ended with dusk, and communities slowed as darkness spread. Candlelight extended wakefulness only so far, and fatigue ensured surrender. Even in the early industrial age, routines bent to natural cycles, with dawn and dusk guiding labor. Only in the last century, and more intensely in the last decade, has technology untethered sleep from the sun. The paradox is subtle but costly. The more we delay sleep for stimulation, the less restorative that stimulation feels. Energy slips, focus scatters, and even pleasure dulls when the body is misaligned. Imagine yourself setting the device aside, allowing the dark to reclaim its rhythm. In that pause, rest returns not as resistance, but as release. Perhaps the sleep delay does not steal time, but trades it poorly, offering moments of distraction at the expense of tomorrow's clarity. The multiverse identity. Imagine yourself stepping into one platform where you appear polished, professional, and careful. A few moments later, on another screen, you slip into a lighter tone, casual, humorous, filled with fragments of daily life. Elsewhere, on a quieter corner, you reveal thoughts that feel too fragile for the others. Each version is you, yet none is whole. You live not as a single self, but as a constellation of selves scattered across digital universes. In earlier centuries, identity was bound to continuity. The neighbors who knew you as a child watched you grow into adulthood, and the roles you played, parent, worker, neighbor, overlapped in the same small circle. Reputation was singular, tethered to the faces around you. Today, identities branch outward. Platforms divide you into versions. One self curates achievement, another offers laughter, another whispers late-night doubts into the void. Like a prism splitting light, the self refracts into parallel forms. Psychologists describe this as role compartmentalization, once reserved for distinct social settings, home, workplace, community. Now it is multiplied, intensified, and constantly visible. The brain adapts by shifting tones quickly, editing words and images to match the norms of each platform. Over time, the shifts become seamless, and you may begin to feel the dissonance of not knowing which version is closest to the truth. History holds echoes of this fragmentation. In ancient plays, masks allowed actors to step into different roles, voices, and identities. In medieval courts, nobles commissioned portraits that emphasized qualities they wished remembered, often at odds with daily life. Yet never before have these fragments been so public, so persistent, and so interconnected. This is the paradox of the multiverse identity. Each version is authentic in its context, but no single version contains the whole. You exist as overlapping reflections, each convincing on its own, yet incomplete together. And beneath it lingers the quiet question: if every self you show is partial, where does the full self reside? Imagine yourself reaching for a device almost without thought. The motion feels automatic, like scratching an itch. You open the feed, scroll, glance, scroll again. Minutes dissolve, replaced by a rhythm that soothes and unsettles at the same time. This is the online addiction cycle, where the brain begins to treat digital streams less as tools and more as substances to be consumed. For most of human history, cravings were tied to the body. Hunger for food, thirst for water, fatigue answered by rest. These signals arose to preserve survival. But in the digital environment, the craving is psychological, yet felt physically. When you cannot check, you may feel restless, distracted, even tense. When you return, the body softens with relief, as if a need has been fed. Neuroscientists explain how feeds activate the same reward pathways as addictive substances. Dopamine surges not from the content itself, but from the anticipation of what comes next. Each refresh is like the pull of a lever, offering a chance at novelty, approval, or surprise. The brain learns to crave not the reward, but the cycle of seeking it. And when the cycle is interrupted, withdrawal appears, fidgeting, anxiety, the sense of something missing. Across cultures, rituals once framed consumption. Meals were shared at fixed times, fasts created pauses, seasons defined when and what could be gathered. These rhythms set limits that allowed desire to cool. Without similar boundaries online, the cycle stretches endlessly, with no natural moment of closure. So you return again and again, chasing relief in the scroll, only to find the craving renewed. And the quiet question lingers: if the feed is both the cure and the cause, how do you ever step outside the loop? Imagine yourself beginning with a single question. You type a few words into a search bar, receive an answer within seconds, and feel a brief sense of closure. Yet almost instantly, that answer suggests another question, then another. One doorway leads to 10 more, each branching into pathways that never seem to end. This is the endless curiosity pull, where knowledge feels infinite and the mind, restless, refuses to stop wandering. Daily life reflects this cycle. A simple search for a recipe becomes a chain of nutrition studies, histories of spices, and debates over cooking methods. A glance at a single news story unfolds into hours of related articles, voices, and commentary. The brain, wired to chase novelty and patterns, thrives in this environment, yet never finds the quiet of completion. Curiosity, once sparked by scarcity, is now fueled by abundance. The fire is never without fuel. Psychologists describe this as the information foraging model. Just as animals wander fields for food, humans now forage online for knowledge. Each discovery releases a spark of reward, urging the search to continue. But unlike the forest or the field, this landscape has no natural boundaries. There is always another link, another suggestion, another answer waiting to be chased. History shows echoes of this. In great libraries, scholars once spent lifetimes chasing threads of questions, their curiosity unfolding slowly across shelves and scrolls. But even there, the limits of access provided a natural stopping point. Today, limits are gone. The search stretches into every hour, blurring the line between learning and compulsion. And so you may wonder, when curiosity no longer ends, when every answer births more questions, does the mind grow wiser or simply more restless, forever circling in the glow of endless discovery? Imagine yourself in a theater centuries ago. A troupe of actors performs on a wooden stage, their gestures exaggerated, their voices carrying through candlelight. The audience knows it is a play, fiction designed to entertain, even as it reflects fragments of truth. The boundaries between life and performance remain clear. Now compare this to today, where the stage has dissolved into countless screens. Streams of daily life appear in endless succession: vlogs, live updates, personal broadcasts. At first glance, they resemble reality, yet they often carry the same rhythms as scripted fiction: careful framing, edited moments, and rehearsed spontaneity. The mind, accustomed to narrative structure, begins to treat these glimpses of others' lives as stories, not as fragments of truth. Psychologists describe this as narrative bias, the tendency to organize reality into arcs, plots, and characters. When lives are consumed through streams, the boundary between fiction and reality blurs. A stranger's triumph may feel staged, their sorrow like a performance, their conflicts shaped for dramatic effect. Imagine yourself watching a medieval mystery play, where everyday struggles were recast as allegory. Now, the allegory is not myth, but the curated fragments of real people, edited until life itself feels like a script. The paradox is subtle. In seeking authenticity, the stream offers performance. In searching for truth, the mind slips into narrative. The more time you spend inside these windows, the easier it becomes to confuse presence with portrayal. You may find yourself comparing your unscripted days to the polished arcs of others, forgetting that the stream is not life, but a reflection, sharpened and trimmed. Imagine yourself turning from the glow of a screen to your own quiet room. No script, no audience, only the unedited rhythm of your breath. The play ends, but the illusion remains, whispering that every life might be a story, even when it is not. Imagine yourself glancing at a phone, certain you saw a banner slide across the screen. You check, but nothing is there. No message, no alert, only silence. This is the phantom notification, a trick of the mind born from constant anticipation. The brain, tuned to expect interruption, begins generating its own. What should be a signal from outside becomes a misfire from within, an echo of expectation carving itself into perception. In daily life, this happens often. A faint vibration seems to hum in your pocket when the phone is on the table. A glimpse of color on the lock screen mimics a badge that never appeared. Even sounds blur. Was that a tone, or did you imagine it? The rhythm of attention is reshaped, pulled toward checking and rechecking. The mind, once free to wander, becomes bound to the possibility of a message caught in loops of false alarms. History offers softer parallels. In the age of letters, people swore they heard footsteps of a postman long before he arrived. During the era of telegraphs, operators reported phantom clicks, their ears tuned so sharply to signals that silence itself seemed to speak. The difference today lies in scale and speed. Where once anticipation rose a few times a week, now it repeats dozens of times a day. The brain, adapting, learns to fire early, even without cause. The paradox is quiet but telling. The more we train ourselves to expect connection, the more we experience its illusion. The very tools designed to inform us instead blur the line between signal and imagination. Imagine yourself noticing the absence, letting the silence stand without checking again. In that pause, you feel the distinction between what is real and what is only the shadow of expectation. Perhaps the phantom notification is less about technology than about us. How quickly the brain, longing for connection, invents it when none arrives. The digital childhood. Imagine yourself at an age when the world is new, when every sound, color, and touch shapes the pathways of the mind. For generations, childhood unfolded outdoors, in fields, in crowded streets, in schools where faces and voices carried lessons as much as books did. Today, many of those moments are filtered through glass screens. Neural maps form not only around people and places, but around pixels, swipes, and the soft glow of endless interaction. In earlier centuries, the rhythms of childhood were slower. Learning to read came with heavy pages. Play meant running through space, and imagination grew in the absence of constant interruption. Memory formed alongside smells of kitchens, the weight of tools, the sound of neighbors at work. Each sensation carved patterns in the brain that reflected the texture of the physical world. Now, in a digital age, patterns form differently. Motion is limited, voices come flattened through speakers, and attention shifts rapidly between fragments. Neuroscientists describe this as plasticity, the brain's ability to reshape itself in response to experience. In children, this plasticity is at its peak. Screens, with their rapid pace and glowing allure, create environments where novelty never ends. The developing brain adapts by expecting speed, brightness, and constant feedback. What was once tuned to slower rhythms of patience and waitings now recalibrated toward immediacy. History shows how tools of learning always influenced growth. The invention of writing shifted memory from oral recitation to external storage. The printing press changed how children encountered information, no longer relying only on elders, but on pages mass-produced. Each technology altered the shape of thought. Yet screens differ in scale. They do not merely store knowledge, but shape the very attention that processes it. This is the paradox of the digital childhood. Technology offers more access, more information, more connection than ever before, yet it also rewires the pathways through which those gifts are understood. Children grow with worlds at their fingertips, but perhaps lose the slowness that once allowed imagination to stretch unprompted. And beneath it all, a quiet question lingers. What will it mean to inherit a mind shaped as much by screens as by the world itself? Imagine yourself reading a comment that strikes you, sharp, dismissive, or unkind. Before the words fully register, the body has already shifted. The chest tightens, the pulse quickens, thought narrows into a single sharp focus. Online, anger often arrives this way. Sudden, immediate, amplified by design. A single remark becomes more than a difference of opinion. It becomes fuel for an adrenaline surge. For most of history, conflict was physical and rare. Disagreements arose in markets, councils, or homes, but they carried weight because they happened face to face. Anger risked consequence, so it was tempered by presence, by tone, by the limits of proximity. Digital life removes those limits. Distance shields consequence, and algorithms elevate conflict, knowing it commands attention longer than calm. The result is an environment where anger spreads with unusual speed. Neuroscientists explain that anger activates the body's stress response. Adrenaline released, heart rate rising, systems primed for action. Repeated often enough, neurons rewire themselves to expect the rush. The brain begins to seek the surge, even unconsciously, lingering on conflict, refreshing for updates, returning to disputes that feel unfinished. The platform becomes less about connection and more about stimulation. Across cultures, rituals once absorbed anger into structured forms, debates with rules, duels with limits, ceremonies for reconciliation. These contained the emotion, allowing it to rise and then resolve. Online, containment dissolves. Conflict loops endlessly, each spark reigniting without conclusion. The cycle trains the brain not toward resolution, but toward repetition. So you scroll, pulse rising, drawn into arguments that may not matter yet feel urgent. And the quiet paradox emerges. The anger is real, the conflict often fleeting, but the body cannot tell the difference. Imagine yourself posting a thought, a photo, or a fragment of your life into the digital crowd. At first, It feels like an act of expression, something outward, something shared. But soon, responses begin to appear. Words from strangers, fragments of approval, disapproval, amusement, or critique. Slowly, the reflections return to you, and you begin to see yourself not only through your own eyes, but through theirs. This is the comment mirror, a surface polished by countless judgments where identity is shaped by echoes you cannot control. Daily life folds around this quiet mirror. A kind remark lingers, inflating confidence. A sharp criticism cuts deeper than you expect, replaying in your thoughts long after you've moved on. Even silence, the absence of response, becomes its own reflection, suggesting invisibility or lack of worth. Over time, the line blurs between who you are and who you appear to be in this endless hall of reactions. The mind, always attuned to social cues for survival, treats each comment as signal, weaving it into the story of the self. Psychologists describe this as the looking glass self. For centuries, people have built their sense of identity by imagining how others perceive them. Yet the digital world multiplies this process 1,000-fold. Instead of a village, you face an audience of strangers. Instead of a handful of voices, you receive hundreds, scattered across cultures and contexts. The reflections are fragmented, but together they form a distorted portrait, one you cannot help but absorb. History hints at older parallels. Writers once lived by the reviews of critics. Performers gauged their worth by applause or silence. But those audiences were smaller, and the judgments less constant. Today, the mirror never fades. It glows beside you, day and night, reflecting every word, every gesture, in ways both subtle and profound. And so you may wonder, when the self is shaped by countless strangers, how much of who you are belongs to you, and how much is only the reflection of their gaze. Imagine yourself standing in a medieval square as a comet blazes across the night sky. The crowd gathers, pointing upward, sharing gasps of awe. For many, it is the only time in their lives they will see such a sight. The wonder becomes a story, carried for decades, binding people together through memory of a single moment. Today, awe spreads differently. A rocket launches, a photograph of distant galaxies is released, or an eclipse darkens the sky. Within minutes, billions can witness it together, not by standing side by side, but by watching from screens scattered across the globe. Psychologists describe this as collective awe, the synchronizing of human attention around a moment so vast it lifts people beyond themselves. Unlike anger or fear, which fragment awe often unites. It softens boundaries, quiets ego, and creates the sense of something larger than the individual. In earlier centuries, awe was tied to rarity. The construction of a cathedral, the unveiling of a painting, or the first sound of an organ might overwhelm the senses. These events drew communities into a common silence. Today, awe can ignite from both the monumental and the fleeting, an image of Earth from orbit, a song shared across platforms, even the sight of coordinated lights in a night sky. The medium changes, but the effect is the same, a moment where the mind expands beyond the familiar. The paradox lies here. In a world where awe can be summoned instantly, it risks losing its rarity, yet its power endures precisely because it is shared. Imagine yourself among billions, watching the same image unfold. Though you sit alone, you are linked invisibly, part of a vast network of gazes lifted at once. And in that connection, wonder itself becomes the thread, fragile, fleeting, but uniting, if only for a moment. Imagine yourself sitting before a keyboard, your hands hovering as though waiting for instruction. You begin to type, and before you realize it, whole phrases flow effortlessly, fingers striking keys in rhythms your mind did not consciously recall. This is the paradox of keyboard memory. The body remembers what the brain has forgotten. Sequences of words, passwords, even entire sentences return not through thought, but through motion. In daily life, this pattern is familiar. You may forget a login until your hands rest on the keys, guiding you through letters automatically. A melody of keystrokes recalls an email address you could not recite aloud. Even common phrases appear without planning, summoned by muscle memory rather than deliberate recall. The rhythm of typing becomes its own archive, storing fragments in movement rather than in conscious thought. History reveals echoes of this phenomenon. Monks who copied texts for decades could trace lines of scripture by hand even when their minds wandered. Musicians, too, find fingers moving across instruments in patterns their minds no longer actively hold. Craftsmen repeat gestures so many times that their bodies preserve what memory releases. The act of repetition transfers knowledge from the fragile space of awareness to the sturdier ground of habit. The paradox rests here. Forgetting does not always mean loss. What fades from conscious recall may survive in the body. Imagine yourself allowing your fingers to type without overthinking, watching words surface as though borrowed from another self. In those moments, memory proves larger than the mind alone. It is distributed, shared between thought and movement, intention and reflex. Perhaps keyboard memory reminds us that remembering is not only a mental act, but a physical one. The body carries knowledge in silence, waiting to reveal it when thought alone comes up empty. The reality blur. Imagine yourself watching a story unfold on a screen, a vivid drama, a documentary, a stranger's carefully curated post. The faces feel familiar, the words feel true, the emotions linger as if you had lived them. Hours later, you recall the scene not as something viewed, but as something almost remembered. The distinction between what happened to you and what you observed begins to soften, as though fiction and reality share the same shelf in memory. In earlier centuries, the boundary was clearer. Stories told around fires or written in manuscripts carried obvious distance. Parables, myths, and legends were understood as lessons or entertainment, separate from lived life. Today, screens collapse those boundaries. A reel of images mixes news with satire, advertisements with diary-like confessions, fiction with reality. The brain, receiving all in the same frame, struggles to sort one from the other. Psychologists note that the human mind does not store information with neat labels. Emotional intensity, repetition, and imagery lodge themselves deeply, regardless of source. This is why dreams can feel like memories, and why a scene from a film may resurface years later with the weight of lived experience. Screens magnify this tendency, delivering constant fragments that the mind weaves into its tapestry of what is real. History offers glimpses of this blurring. Medieval villagers believed traveling bards' tales as half-truths, mixing myth with history. Early newspapers reported rumor alongside fact, shaping perceptions of distant wars and rulers. Yet the difference today lies in speed and saturation. The blur is not occasional, but constant, surrounding you in every idle glance at a device. This is the paradox of the reality blur. Screens promise clarity and access to truth, yet they dissolve the very line between fact and fiction. What you see shapes what you believe, and what you believe shapes how you remember. Over time, the distinction fades, not because you cannot tell, but because the mind adapts to a world where both feel equally real. And beneath it all lingers a quiet question. In a life so interwoven with images, how much of what you recall truly happened, and how much was only seen? Imagine yourself watching a simple act, a stranger helping someone lift a heavy bag, a hand extended to guide another across a street. The moment seems small, yet when captured and shared, it ripples outward. Thousands, sometimes millions, pause to feel the warmth of a kindness they did not witness in person. Compassion, like anger or fear, can also spread virally, reshaping how empathy is experienced in the digital age. For most of history, compassion was local. Villagers cared for neighbors, families tended to one another. Aid traveled no farther than the reach of voice or hand. Empathy was built face to face, through shared hardship and mutual survival. Now, the screen extends that circle indefinitely. A gesture of generosity in one corner of the world can be felt in another within seconds, creating a web of shared feeling unbound by distance. Neuroscientists describe how mirror neurons allow us to feel the emotions we observe. Just as anger online can raise adrenaline, images of kindness can soften the body, slow the breath, release oxytocin. The effect is real, though the experience is secondhand. Yet repetition changes the brain's expectation. We begin to seek stories of kindness as proof that humanity endures, as reassurance that goodness exists among the noise. Across cultures, rituals once carried compassion forward. Offerings to the hungry, pilgrimages of service, festivals of gift-giving, all were designed to remind people of their shared dependence. Online, compassion finds new rituals in the form of shares, likes, reposts. The acts are light, but the spread is vast, making empathy visible on a scale no village could hold. So the kindness travels, leaping from screen to screen, reaching people who will never meet the giver or the receiver. And the quiet realization remains, cruelty may travel quickly, but compassion can too. Imagine yourself joining a group online. Perhaps it begins with a shared interest, a hobby, a belief, a cause. At first, it feels like conversation, strangers exchanging fragments of thought. But with repetition, the group takes on the shape of a tribe. Inside jokes form, language shifts, and belonging becomes a kind of currency. Soon, your brain responds as if these distant, unseen companions were members of a village bound by proximity and survival. This is the online tribe, connections stitched together not by geography, but by pixels and signals. Daily life now includes these invisible clans. People wake to check what their group is saying, fall asleep still immersed in shared debates or celebrations. Approval from fellow members feels rewarding. Disapproval feels stinging, almost personal. The human nervous system, tuned for millennia to find safety and belonging, cannot tell the difference between a circle around a fire and a thread of comments glowing in the dark. The same circuitry that once guarded against exile now responds to likes, retweets, and replies. Researchers describe this as digital tribalism. Once, tribes were formed by necessity, sharing food, defending territory, raising children together. Online, tribes are formed by ideas, identities, and symbols. What they lack in physical closeness, they make up for in intensity. The group reinforces itself, shaping how its members think, what they believe, and even how they speak. Over time, the tribe's voice can grow louder in the mind than one's own. History offers echoes. Ancient guilds, secret societies, religious sects, all offered belonging beyond the family, yet their growth was limited by distance. The online tribe erases such limits, drawing people together across continents in moments, sustaining bonds through constant communication. And so you may wonder, when the brain feels equally at home in a digital tribe as in a physical one, what does belonging mean? Is it safety, or is it another form of dependency? An invisible tether pulling identity toward the group's embrace. Imagine yourself centuries ago, staring at the night sky. A strange light flickers near the horizon. Is it a wandering star, a divine sign, or the lantern of travelers unseen? With no way to know, the mystery deepens. Questions linger for years, sometimes for generations. The unknown was not a threat alone, it was also a source of wonder. The absence of answers gave space for imagination. Today, the rhythm is different. A question rises in thought. What bird sings outside your window? Why the moon glows red? Where a phrase originated? And almost instantly, a search reveals the answer. Curiosity collapses into efficiency. The moment of not knowing, once stretched across time, now vanishes in seconds. Psychologists describe this as the shrinking of epistemic curiosity, when the pleasure of discovery is cut short by immediate resolution. Historically, mystery shaped culture. Folktales grew around unexplained lights in the sky, legends formed around ruins with unknown builders, entire philosophies blossomed from unanswered questions. The slowness of knowledge allowed stories to breathe, binding communities together in shared speculation. Today, much of that terrain is flattened. The question that once invited wonder now ends with a tap, and the search bar replaces silence. This is the paradox of the lost mystery. By filling every gap, we risk losing the space where imagination grows. Answers bring clarity, yet they can also erase the delicate texture of wonder that uncertainty provides. Imagine yourself hearing a riddle and finding the solution too quickly. It satisfies, but the lingering magic is gone. Still, mystery has not disappeared entirely. It hides in the vastness of the cosmos, in the depths of the ocean, in the folds of memory itself. But the challenge now is not reaching answers. It is remembering to pause before them, to sit, if only briefly, in the quiet where wonder once lived. Imagine yourself opening a feed, watching headlines, voices, and images rush past. Somewhere across the globe, panic rises, storms, crashes, conflicts, losses, and though you are distant, your pulse quickens as if it were near. This is the paradox of streamed anxiety, the mind adopting fears that belong to strangers, carrying burdens never directly lived. The nervous system does not distinguish distance, it only feels the surge, as if danger is everywhere at once. In daily life, this repetition is constant. You scroll through disasters in the morning, political tension by noon, and personal tragedies shared widely by night. Each fragment embeds itself, layering unease. The body reacts to what it sees with the same subtle signals it would to local threat: shallow breaths, restless sleep, an undercurrent of vigilance. The rhythm of awareness shifts from grounded presence to borrowed distress, anxiety not born of experience but of exposure. History offers gentler versions of this spread. Rumors in crowded markets once fueled local unrest. Printed pamphlets carried distant fears slowly from town to town. Yet the pace allowed distance, reflection tempered reaction. Today, with live streams and instant updates, the velocity is relentless. The mind is asked to hold the suffering of thousands simultaneously, a burden it was never built to bear. The paradox is clear. Global connection widens empathy, but narrows calm. To care for distant lives is noble, but to internalize their panic erodes balance. Imagine yourself pausing before the next headline, letting silence stand between you and the flood. In that space, empathy remains, but panic loosens its grip. Perhaps streamed anxiety is not only a symptom of technology, but of compassion stretched thin, reminding us that while we cannot carry the world's panic, we can still choose how deeply it enters our own. The simulation feel. Imagine yourself scrolling through a feed, only to notice the strange timing of events. A phrase you spoke earlier appears in an ad. A conversation you had yesterday seems echoed in a stranger's post. A pattern emerges, not precise enough to prove, but uncanny enough to feel scripted. Life begins to resemble a program, unfolding according to rules you can sense but never see. In earlier centuries, people explained such coincidences through fate, through gods, through omens hidden in the ordinary. A crow circling overhead, a repeated number, a chance encounter, all were taken as signs of design. Today, the internet creates similar patterns. Algorithms surface what seems relevant, stitching fragments into narratives that feel too pointed to be random. A search here, a like there, and suddenly the world reflects back your hidden thoughts. Psychologists call this apophenia, the mind's tendency to find meaning in chance. Yet digital systems magnify the effect because they are not purely random. They respond, predict, and adapt to your behavior, creating a loop where the unexpected feels planned. A coincidence online often is not coincidence at all, but the result of unseen code arranging the world into a mirror of your attention. History holds echoes of this sensation. Ancient diviners read patterns in smoke or the flight of birds, believing hidden forces scripted human fate. Medieval scholars spoke of a book of nature, a text written by God in every leaf and star. Today, the script feels technological rather than divine. The code is invisible, but its influence is everywhere, quietly shaping what you see, when you see it, and how you interpret it. This is the paradox of the simulation feel. The more connected you are, the more the world seems programmed. A system designed to predict your preferences begins to feel like destiny itself. And in quiet moments, a question arises. If so much of what you encounter is arranged, how much of your life is truly choice, and how much is already written in lines of code you cannot read? Imagine yourself surrounded by words, images, sounds, all arriving faster than you can sort them. News, messages, videos, reminders. Each fragment is small, but together they crowd the mind like papers scattered across a desk. When you reach for a memory, it slips. When you try to hold a thought, it drifts. This is the fog of too much input, where the brain slows not from silence, but from saturation. For most of history, information came slowly. A story told by a neighbor, a letter delivered days late, a book read and reread until its pages were worn. Knowledge arrived with weight and lingered long enough to settle into memory. Today, the flow is constant, overwhelming in its volume and speed. Instead of sinking deep, attention skims the surface, never staying long enough for ideas to root. Neuroscientists describe how working memory has limits. When it is filled beyond capacity, recall falters. Too many inputs compete, and the pathways that would normally strengthen through repetition remain shallow. The result feels like fog. Names escape. Sentences blur. The mind moves more slowly, even as it consumes more. The paradox is simple. Never before have we had so much information, and never before has it been so hard to hold. Across cultures, people once created rituals to protect clarity. Prayers at dawn, evenings of quiet, deliberate pauses before speech. These rhythms gave space for memory to form, for thought to sharpen. Without such pauses, the fog thickens, and the mind begins to drift within it. So you continue scrolling, absorbing fragments you cannot fully keep. And when the silence comes, it feels less like rest and more like absence, until you remember that fog is not emptiness at all, but the crowding of too much. Imagine yourself typing a question into a search bar. For you, it feels like a private moment, a curiosity expressed and quickly forgotten. Yet each query leaves a mark, recorded in silent systems that archive not only your words, but patterns of thought across billions of people. This is the search shadow, a vast collection of questions that lingers behind us, shaping what the world remembers and how knowledge itself is ordered. Daily life unfolds against this backdrop. The suggestions you see when you begin typing are drawn from the echoes of others' searches. The headlines that rise to the top are chosen because countless people before you clicked the same way. Even the language you use bends slightly toward phrases the system understands best. Bit by bit, individual curiosity is folded into a collective map, and that map then guides what future seekers are likely to find. Researchers call this the feedback loop of information. Systems trained on human questions reflect those same questions back, reinforcing trends, amplifying concerns, and nudging attention toward what is already popular. Over time, the quiet weight of billions of queries reshapes collective thought, not through censorship, but through repetition. What is asked most often begins to appear most important, while what is rarely asked risks being forgotten. History shows parallels. In ancient libraries, the most copied scrolls survived, while rarer works faded into silence. In newspapers, editors chose which stories appeared on front pages, setting the rhythm of public concern. Today, the search shadow takes on that role, only on a global scale, invisible and automatic. And so you may wonder, if every question leaves a trace, and those traces guide the next generation of thought, who is truly writing the story of human curiosity, you or the shadow of all the searches that came before? Imagine yourself in a scriptorium centuries ago. A monk leans over parchment, dipping his quill in ink, each letter formed with careful intention. The act of writing was deliberate, almost meditative. Errors were rare, Not because the mind was perfect, but because the process demanded such patience that every mark was weighed. A mistake meant scraping the parchment, leaving behind a faint scar of correction. Now compare this with today, where words flow quickly through keys and screens. Each line is shadowed by the quiet presence of autocorrect and spell check. The mind begins to lean on these hidden companions, no longer fully trusting its own hand. Psychologists describe this as externalized memory, the brain relinquishing part of its responsibility when a tool is always ready to intervene. The result is the phantom typo, a creeping doubt that something you wrote is wrong, even when it is not. Writers now often reread sentences not to savor them, but to search for errors, expecting the red underline to appear. The confidence of thought is replaced with suspicion, a subtle erosion of trust in one's own words. Imagine yourself sending a letter, pausing not because you lack meaning, but because you are certain some unseen system will point out a flaw you might have missed. Historically, writing was an anchor of certainty. What was placed on the page felt final. Today, it feels provisional, always subject to correction. The paradox is that tools designed to strengthen expression can quietly weaken confidence. What was once an act of permanence now feels like a draft, endlessly waiting for adjustment. Imagine yourself waking to a screen lit with headlines, disaster here, conflict there, an endless cascade of urgency. Before the day begins, the mind is already drenched in crisis. This is the news storm effect. Waves of information striking faster than the brain can absorb, leaving a residue of fatigue and unease. What once arrived as an occasional bulletin now pours through every hour, a storm without pause, blurring what is urgent with what is simply loud. In daily life, this feels like a constant battering. You check the news to stay informed, but each story bleeds into the next. Economic downturns follow political scandals, followed by environmental alarms. The rhythm is relentless, each notification another drop in the flood. The body absorbs this as stress, a tightening in the chest, a restlessness in thought, a sense of being pulled in too many directions at once. The result is not clarity, but exhaustion, as though attention itself is weathered by the storm. History shows how differently information once arrived. In villages, news traveled with the pace of footsteps or ships, giving space to process before the next report. Even in the age of newspapers, crises appeared once a day, their weight considered before the next edition. Only in recent decades has crisis become continuous, fed by networks designed to compete for attention. The storm no longer breaks. It rages constantly. The paradox is sharp. By trying to remain informed, we may lose the very stability that information should provide. The more storms we allow in, the less grounded we feel. Imagine yourself choosing when to look, setting the boundary where the flood ends. In that pause, perspective returns, and the storm passes without drowning you in its noise. Perhaps the news storm effect reminds us that the brain was built not for endless crisis, but for measured waves. To survive the storm, one must sometimes step ashore. The online persona ghost. Imagine yourself recalling a profile that no longer exists, a friend, a stranger, perhaps only a passing voice who once filled your feed with images and words. Their account is gone, deleted, erased, vanished from the grid. Yet your memory still holds fragments, a sentence they wrote, a photograph they posted, the rhythm of their digital presence. In the quiet of your mind, their ghost lingers, not in flesh, but in pixels that no longer remain. In earlier centuries, memory of the absent took different forms. Villagers remembered neighbors who moved away, soldiers who never returned, voices once carried by letters, now silent. Those memories faded slowly, softened with time. Today, absence feels sharper. A name once clickable becomes a blank space. A link that once opened now reads, "User not found." The suddenness of digital disappearance creates its own haunting, as though a shadow remains where presence used to be. Psychologists speak of phantom memory, The way the mind recalls things that no longer exist, replaying traces as if they were still there. Online, this becomes magnified. You may find yourself remembering not just a person, but the way they appeared in algorithmic rhythms, the posts at certain hours, the style of their captions, the echo of their likes. What was once casual becomes uncanny in its absence, a ghost woven from data that has been erased but not forgotten. History offers echoes of this haunting. In ancient Rome, epitaphs carved on stone preserved names long after bodies turned to dust. In medieval manuscripts, scribes left marginal notes for readers they would never meet. Each was a way of preserving presence beyond its natural span. The difference today is that the ghost can vanish abruptly, leaving no trace but memory. This is the paradox of the online persona ghost. Digital life feels permanent, yet can dissolve in an instant. What lingers is not the account, but the imprint it left on thought. And so, the ghost endures, not as something supernatural, but as a reminder that in a world of endless connection, absence can still haunt more deeply than presence. Imagine yourself reading a phrase that would have made no sense just a few years ago, a cluster of letters, an inside joke, an image turned into shorthand. You pause, then realize it carries meaning only in the present moment, only within the flow of online culture. Language, once steady across generations, now reshapes itself at dizzying speed. Words appear, shift, vanish, like waves breaking and dissolving before they can settle. For most of history, vocabulary changed slowly. You see, farmers, merchants, and poets spoke in rhythms that echoed for centuries. Dialects formed, but they held long enough to become traditions. A child could understand the words of a grandparent, even if accents differed. Today, the gap between generations can be measured in months, not decades. What is familiar slang to one group may already feel outdated to another. Linguists explain that the internet accelerates natural processes of change. Memes and hashtags act as catalysts, spreading new expressions across millions of people overnight. Each repetition strengthens the signal, but its very speed makes it fragile. A phrase burned too brightly risks being abandoned quickly, replaced by the next. The cycle leaves language in constant flux, its meanings both shared and unstable. Across cultures, language was once protected by ritual. Sacred texts, proverbs, and oral traditions gave words a weight that resisted erosion. They anchored speech in continuity, reminding communities that language carried memory. But online, the anchors loosen. The same word may shift tone, meaning, or emotion in the span of weeks. So you scroll through new words, using them even as they slip toward obsolescence. And the quiet question lingers. If language is the thread of thought, what happens when the thread frays faster than we can follow? Imagine yourself trying to explain a feeling. Instead of reaching for a long sentence, your mind supplies a short, looping image, a clip from a movie, a fragment of animation, a gesture caught in repetition. The moment is compact, familiar, and it seems to capture the emotion better than words could. This is the GIF thought, an idea compressed into a loop, repeated until it feels like expression itself. Daily life now reflects this shift. People respond to conversations not with paragraphs, but with brief loops. A raised eyebrow, a character collapsing in laughter, a hand clapping in endless rhythm. Over time, the brain begins to borrow this style of expression internally. Thoughts arrive as flashes, quick and repetitive, rather than extended lines of reasoning. The inner world starts to resemble the feeds we consume, fragmented, vivid, endlessly looping. Psychologists suggest that memory itself favors images and repetition, so GIFs and short clips settle easily into the mind. The danger, they note, is that compression changes content. The richness of a narrative is replaced by a distilled gesture. Subtlety disappears in favor of what can be conveyed instantly. Thought becomes faster, but also thinner, shaped to match the pace of the medium. History offers echoes. In oral traditions, proverbs and parables condensed long lessons into memorable fragments. In religious rituals, chants repeated phrases until they carried more weight than full arguments. But today, the repetition is visual, digital, and constant, woven into everyday communication rather than rare ceremony. And so you may wonder, when thought itself begins to take the shape of loops and fragments, do we lose the depth of sentences and stories? Or are we simply evolving toward a new language of the mind, one that speaks in endless repetition, as if memory itself has learned to play on a loop? Imagine yourself in a medieval village where thought was largely private. What occupied your mind was shaped by the rhythm of local life, the market, the fields, the turning of seasons. Ideas spread slowly through sermons, songs, and travelers' stories. Rarely would entire regions think of the same thing at the same time. Today, the pace is entirely different. A single event, a championship match, a breaking story, an image from space can capture the attention of millions simultaneously. Minds, scattered across continents, align for a moment around the same detail. Psychologists describe this as a kind of cognitive synchronization, where individual thought bends toward collective focus. The scale is unprecedented. Billions of neurons spread across billions of people, all firing in response to the same signal. Historically, shared thought emerged from rituals and festivals. A cathedral bell summoned the faithful. A king's coronation unified a realm. A comet in the sky drew all eyes upward. These moments were rare, anchored in place and time. Now, they happen daily, carried through screens and streams. The shared rhythm of attention no longer requires gathering in a square. It unfolds in living rooms, on trains, in the quiet isolation of bedrooms, yet still together. The paradox is striking. By syncing so easily, thought grows both closer and thinner. Connection feels instant, yet fleeting. You may recall where you were when a global moment unfolded, but the depth of it fades as quickly as it arrived. Imagine yourself joining millions in watching a launch pierce the atmosphere. For a few seconds, every gaze lifts. Then, like water dispersing into streams, attention scatters again, each mind returning to its own private flow. Shared wonder, shared fear, shared curiosity. They ripple through us now with unprecedented speed. And yet, like echoes fading in a vast hall, the unity does not last. It is a sync, not a permanence, a reminder that the mind can align with millions, only to drift apart again in silence. Imagine yourself surrounded by countless voices online, messages flowing, icons glowing, timelines never empty. You are connected, yet the feeling lingers, a hollow space where closeness should be. This is the loneliness illusion. The brain, wired through millennia to seek eye contact, shared meals, and the warmth of touch, cannot be fully fooled by digital presence. Crowds online appear abundant, but to the nervous system, they remain distant shadows. In daily life, this illusion plays quietly. A night spent scrolling through conversations leaves you oddly unsatisfied. Hundreds of comments or likes land on a post, yet the comfort fades within minutes. Even video calls, rich with sight and sound, cannot supply the subtle cues of proximity, the shift of breath, the rhythm of footsteps, the brush of another's hand. The body craves contact no screen can provide. History offers perspective. In ancient marketplaces, the closeness of others was not optional. Bumping shoulders, overhearing voices, sharing space. These daily contacts reinforced belonging. In monasteries, even silence carried presence. Monks at prayer bound by shared air and routine. Loneliness existed, but its texture was different, born of isolation in the physical world, not from a paradox of digital abundance. Today, the crowd is visible but intangible, creating a new kind of solitude, one surrounded by echoes. The paradox rests here. More connection brings less fulfillment. The wider the digital circle, the deeper the ache for something physical. Imagine yourself stepping away, sitting across from another person, even in silence. The brain responds with calm, as if reassured by the simplest proof of nearness. Perhaps the loneliness illusion reminds us that presence is not measured in numbers, but in closeness, and that a single moment of touch can outweigh 1,000 distant words. The virtual courage. Imagine yourself behind a screen, your name replaced by a symbol, your face absent, your presence distilled into text. Without the weight of recognition, you say what you might never speak aloud. The words arrive faster, sharper, less restrained. In anonymity, fear recedes, and courage takes its place. Not the courage of risk or sacrifice, but the boldness of hidden selves stepping forward. In earlier centuries, courage required visibility. A soldier faced an enemy, a speaker stood before a crowd, a dissenter risked punishment for their voice. Recognition was part of the act. The community knew who had spoken, who had acted. Today, anonymity reshapes that landscape. A single comment can travel widely, detached from the person who wrote it. Fear, once tied to reputation and consequence, dissolves into the safety of distance. Psychologists describe this as the online disinhibition effect, when the absence of face-to-face presence lowers restraint. For some, this allows kindness that might otherwise go unspoken, encouragement, confession, solidarity. For others, it breeds hostility, cruelty, or words sharpened beyond civility. Both grow from the same root, the loosening of fear, the discovery of a voice unbound by identity. History holds parallels. In medieval carnivals, masks allowed townsfolk to speak freely, mocking nobles, confessing secrets, inverting social roles for a day. In ancient plays, actors wore faces not their own, channeling truths that might have been dangerous without disguise. Anonymity has always carried power, but never before has it been so constant, available at the tap of a screen. This is the paradox of virtual courage. Anonymity frees the self, but also fragments it. The hidden voice may reveal truths, or it may distort them. And beneath every comment, every anonymous act, lingers a question. Was this the real you, finally unmasked, or merely another mask, emboldened by the safety of shadows? Imagine yourself holding a scale, the kind once used to weigh grain or coins. In earlier times, the balance was simple. You compared what you had against what you needed, or against what your neighbor carried. The circle of comparison was small, bounded by village, family, or trade. But now, the scale has no edges. Each time you look, it tilts against billions of others, measuring not just wealth or beauty, but every aspect of living. The result is a fog of comparisons, thick enough to blur the outline of who you are. For most of history, success was local, a harvest judged by the season's weather, skill measured against those working beside you. There was discomfort, yes, but also clarity. You knew the terms of the comparison. Today, the digital scroll creates infinite scales, followers, likes, views, curated lives displayed as benchmarks. The ground beneath your sense of self shifts with each new image, each fleeting update. Psychologists describe how constant comparison disrupts the brain's ability to anchor self-worth. Instead of measuring against personal growth or stable goals, identity is recalibrated again and again, chasing moving targets. The fog thickens because there is no finish line. Every standard dissolves as soon as it is reached. The more you compare, the more incomplete you feel. Across cultures, rituals once offered protection from this drift. Festivals reminded communities that worth was shared, not ranked. Ceremonies of age or role gave stable points of identity, independent of shifting measures. Without such anchors, the comparison fog expands, clouding not only how you see yourself, but how you experience others. So you scroll, caught between admiration and unease, the scale tilting endlessly. And the question settles softly. If every measure is infinite, how will you ever know what is enough? Imagine yourself sitting in front of more than one glowing screen. A laptop hums with open tabs, a phone buzzes nearby, a television flickers in the corner. Attention shifts between them, never staying long. A message interrupts a video, A notification distracts from a page of text, and a second later, another signal appears. The brain tries to keep pace, darting rapidly between tasks. This is the multi-screen mind, an adaptation to constant input, where deep focus fractures into fragments of attention. Daily life often unfolds this way. Work is done while music plays, while messages arrive, while another screen streams in the background. None of these tasks are fully abandoned, but none are fully absorbed either. The surface feels efficient, as though many things are being accomplished at once. Yet beneath, the mind struggles, caught in a rhythm of interruption. What feels like multitasking is often only rapid switching, each return costing energy, each shift leaving traces of the one before. Psychologists call this attention residue. Each unfinished task lingers in the brain, clouding the next, making focus thinner, more fragile. Over time, the habit becomes automatic, the mind restless without multiple streams of input, uncomfortable with the stillness of a single task. The result is a paradox. Surrounded by endless information, we risk losing the capacity to follow a single thread to its depth. History reveals earlier versions of divided attention. In crowded marketplaces, voices competed for ears. In factories, machines clattered with unending noise, demanding awareness of many things at once. But the difference today is scale and proximity. Screens sit inches from the eyes, their signals tuned precisely to draw attention, leaving little room for silence. And so you may wonder, when the mind is trained to juggle so many streams at once, what happens to the deeper forms of thought, the kind that unfold slowly, in stillness, without interruption? Imagine yourself in an earlier century where fame moved slowly. A poet's words traveled by copied manuscripts, a singer's voice carried by taverns and courts, a traveler's tale spread town by town. Recognition took years, sometimes decades, to gather momentum. The mind grew accustomed to slow ascent, the weaving of reputation into memory through repetition and presence. Today, that rhythm is overturned. A single clip, a single phrase, or a fleeting image can propel an unknown into global recognition overnight. Psychologists call this the viral fame circuit, the sudden leap from obscurity to visibility, igniting memory pathways not built for such speed. The brain, conditioned to gradual familiarity, reacts with shock. Someone who was no one in your world yesterday is suddenly unavoidable, their face imprinted across feeds and headlines. This circuit is fueled not by depth, but by scale. Visibility becomes repetition, and repetition becomes memory. You may not know the story, but you recall the face, the gesture, the moment that spiraled outward. Unlike past fame, which rested on sustained accomplishment, viral fame rests on circulation alone. The paradox is that recognition arrives without context and memory accepts it nonetheless. Historically, stories of sudden fame were rare. An unknown knight distinguished in battle, a peasant whose miracle drew pilgrims. But even then, tales spread through time, tempered by distance. Today, the leap is instant and the fall just as quick. The mind, jolted by speed, struggles to place these figures, known but not known, memorable yet fleeting. Imagine yourself recalling dozens of faces that once filled headlines, now blurred into fragments. The viral fame circuit leaves impressions that feel permanent in the moment, yet dissolve faster than the fame itself. Imagine yourself opening an old account, its archive stretching back years. Photos, conversations, forgotten searches, all preserved with perfect clarity. What once might have faded naturally now lingers, unchanged, waiting to be recalled at a click. This is the paradox of archive weight. The past, once fluid and selective, now preserved in servers that never forget. Memory becomes less about what the mind holds and more about what machines refuse to release. In daily life, this weight grows quietly. An old message resurfaces in a notification. A cloud album reminds you of a day you had let soften with time. Even mistakes, long outlived in feeling, remain searchable. The rhythm of forgetting, so essential to healing and growth, struggles against the permanence of digital storage. Where memory once blurred with kindness, technology preserves with precision. History offers echoes of this unease. Ancient civilizations carved records into stone, but erosion softened their edges. Scrolls crumbled, manuscripts burned, and forgetting, though tragic, allowed renewal. Even printed letters yellowed, fading into fragments of family lore. Today's archives resist this decay. The cloud holds words and images in stasis, detached from the mercy of time. The human need to move forward collides with a digital past that never loosens its grip. The paradox lies here. Preservation feels like security, yet becomes a burden. To know that nothing is lost is also to know that nothing is gone. Imagine yourself pausing before reopening an old file, asking whether memory serves you better softened by time than frozen in clarity. In that pause, forgetting regains its dignity. Perhaps the archive weight reminds us that memory's strength lies not only in what is kept, but in what is allowed to fade, the shared silence. Imagine yourself reaching for your device, expecting the usual hum of connection, messages flowing, updates refreshing, voices overlapping in countless threads. Instead, nothing arrives. The screen stalls. A circle spins endlessly. For a moment, you assume it is your signal, your device. Then you realize it is everywhere. The network itself has fallen silent. In earlier centuries, silence was natural. Letters could take weeks, conversations ended at dusk, news traveled only as fast as footsteps or sails. People knew the rhythm of waiting, the patience of distance. Today, silence feels like rupture. When the network vanishes, the absence presses against you, not as rest, but as unease. The sudden void exposes how much of your attention leans upon constant connection. Psychologists note how the brain adapts to steady patterns of stimulation. The ping of a message, the scroll of new content, the subtle reward of being included. These signals become part of daily rhythm. When they disappear, the nervous system interprets the absence as loss. Panic rises, not from danger, but from disconnection. It feels as though something essential has been cut away. History offers glimpses of similar disruptions. A town crier silenced by illness left villages uneasy, rumors spreading in the vacuum of news. A telegraph line severed during war created dread, as though the world itself had gone missing. Yet those silences were local, scattered, temporary. Today, when a global platform stalls, the silence is shared across millions. Strangers in distant cities sit before the same frozen screen, each experiencing the same void, bound together not by sound, but by its absence. This is the paradox of the shared silence. Connection was built to unite, yet its collapse reveals another kind of unity. For a brief moment, billions are reminded of the same fragility, that the voices we depend on can vanish in an instant. And in that void, a question lingers quietly. If silence unsettles us so deeply, have we forgotten how to rest within it? Imagine yourself listening to a voice that seems clear, steady, familiar. It tells a story, explains a fact, even comforts in its tone. Yet a quiet uncertainty lingers. Was it spoken by a person or shaped by a machine? The boundary between the human and the artificial has grown faint, and the mind, tuned for centuries to trust voices, struggles to tell the difference. For most of history, voices carried the weight of presence. A mother's lullaby, a teacher's instruction, a ruler's decree, all bore the subtle cues of breath, hesitation, and rhythm. To hear a voice was to know someone was near, but now, with artificial intelligence, voices are generated that mimic these same cues. They pause where humans pause, rise where emotion rises, soften where empathy belongs. The brain receives them as if they were alive, even when no speaker exists. Neuroscientists describe how the brain's auditory pathways evolved to detect intention in sound, tone revealing mood, cadence suggesting trust, breath hinting at truth. But machines can now replicate these signals with such precision that recognition falters. What was once instinct, the ability to hear the human in the voice, becomes a guessing game. Across cultures, voices held sacred power. Chants, hymns, and spoken blessings were believed to carry not only meaning but spirit. The voice was the proof of being. In the age of artificial sound, that proof blurs. A hymn, a story, even a conversation can be conjured without a speaker, leaving the listener unsure where humanity begins and ends. So you listen closely, searching for the telltale signs of life. And the question grows harder to answer. When the voice feels real, does it matter who or what spoke it? Imagine yourself looking into a screen that reflects your face, not as it is, but as it has been softened, brightened, reshaped. Lines are blurred, eyes widened, skin smoothed into an artificial glow. At first, it feels like a playful adjustment, a harmless filter laid gently over reality. But over time, the brain begins to remember this altered version more vividly than the natural one. This is the filtered self, where identity adapts to masks until the unedited face feels unfamiliar. Daily life quietly reinforces this shift. Photos are retouched before they are shared. Video calls offer subtle enhancements by default. Even mirrors are sometimes judged against the polished images seen online. The nervous system, tuned to recognize and recall faces with remarkable precision, begins to favor the edited version. Soon, the natural reflection seems lacking, less authentic than the digital mask. Psychologists describe this as perception drift. Repeated exposure to a modified image reshapes memory, so the altered version becomes the standard against which reality is judged. Some researchers call it filter dysmorphia, a quiet unease when the real face does not align with the remembered one. The brain struggles to hold both images at once, adapting to the one it sees most often. History offers parallels. In portrait painting, artists often idealize their subjects, softening features, exaggerating youth. In early photography, long exposures required carefully staged stillness, creating faces that were more composed than lived. Yet those images were exceptions, not daily companions. The filtered self, by contrast, is constant, woven into every moment of digital self-presentation. And so, you may wonder, when memory itself begins to favor the mask, what happens to the unedited self? Does it fade quietly into the background, or does it linger as a ghost, half forgotten, waiting to be recognized again? Imagine yourself in front of a polished pool centuries ago, staring into the still water. The reflection is simple, a silent echo of your form. It shows only surface, the curve of the face, the fall of hair, the bend of posture. What it reveals is limited, but also grounding. You see yourself as others might see you, and nothing more. Today, the reflection has multiplied. Screens do not simply show your appearance. They reveal fragments of your inner life, stitched together by patterns of search, words typed, images liked, and time spent. In subtle ways, they become mirrors of identity, not of the body, but of the self. A feed reflects your interests, a profile reflects your choices, and over time, these digital reflections reshape how you understand who you are. Psychologists note that identity is not fixed, but formed through feedback. When the mirror was glass, feedback came from glances and voices. Now, it comes from screens, which reflect what you click, what you linger on, and what algorithms feed back. The result is a mirror that shows not only who you are, but who you might become if you continue along that path. Historically, people feared distorted mirrors, legends of enchanted glass that could twist truth into illusion. The modern screen functions in a similar way. It reflects, but it also edits, curates, and highlights. You may discover parts of yourself you had not noticed, or you may begin to perform for the reflection, shaping identity to match what is shown back. The paradox is subtle. The more clearly the mirror screen reflects, the less certain the self becomes. What you see feels personal, yet it is shaped by forces outside you. Imagine yourself staring into a pool that ripples with each movement, never still, never final. In the end, You may not be sure if you are gazing at your reflection or at a version of yourself that the mirror has quietly created. Imagine yourself walking through an ordinary day, each step, each word, each fleeting search quietly recorded. Devices log locations, servers capture conversations, cameras preserve gestures. What once passed unnoticed now lingers in databases, extending memory far beyond what the brain itself could hold. This is the paradox of infinite memory. Every action preserved, yet the natural rhythm of forgetting disrupted. Where the mind once allowed moments to fade, technology insists on permanence. In daily life, this permanence is subtle but constant. A search history remembers curiosities you forgot. Old posts resurface unbidden, anchoring you to versions of yourself you no longer are. Even thoughts once private, typed into drafts or whispered to assistants, may exist somewhere, archived and retrievable. The rhythm of living, once guided by impermanence, shifts into a state where nothing is ever truly past. The mind is extended into eternity, but weighed down by what it cannot release. History offers gentler contrasts. Oral cultures relied on selective memory, preserving what mattered through repetition and letting the rest dissolve. Even written records, subject to decay, carried imperfection that softened the sharpness of the past. Today, imperfection is erased. The digital record is exact, and its scope nearly total. What was once fleeting is now permanent. What was once private is now searchable. The paradox is sharp. Infinite memory promises security, yet denies renewal. To grow often requires forgetting, to release old selves, to allow wounds to fade, to let errors slip away. Imagine yourself choosing what to recall and what to leave buried, even when the archive urges you to revisit. In that choice lies the balance between memory and freedom. Perhaps infinite memory does not extend life, but traps it, teaching us that the ability to forget is as vital as the ability to remember. The final echo. Imagine yourself remembering something from years ago, a phrase, an image, a story. You pause, uncertain whether it came from your own experience or from a screen. The distinction feels blurred. Over time, the internet's rhythms, voices, and fragments have not only shaped your thoughts, but quietly fused with them. The echo of the online world is no longer separate. It resounds inside, as though memory itself has merged with the feed. In earlier centuries, thought was slower, tied to personal encounters and to the words of those nearby. Stories came from family, from neighbors, from the limited reach of books. Reflection carried the weight of scarcity. Today, reflection is entangled with abundance. Search results and timelines appear the instant a question forms, guiding not only what you know, but how you know it. Thought itself becomes collaborative with machines, built less from silence and more from constant reply. Psychologists describe this as cognitive offloading, outsourcing memory to external systems. You no longer need to recall facts when they are stored in vast digital archives. Instead, the brain adapts, focusing less on holding information and more on how to find it. Over time, this reshapes the very architecture of thought. The internet is no longer just a tool you use. It is a framework through which your mind organizes reality. History offers glimpses of this transformation. The invention of writing once shifted memory from spoken word to stone and parchment. The printing press multiplied voices and altered how ideas spread. Each innovation did not simply add knowledge, it altered the shape of human thought. The internet continues that lineage, but at a scale so pervasive that its influence dissolves the boundary between what is remembered within and what is recalled from without. This is the paradox of the final echo. The more you use the internet as an extension of thought, the less you can separate where your mind ends and the network begins. In the end, what you recall, what you believe, what you dream, may all carry the resonance of that echo. And in the quiet, a question lingers. When the internet becomes thought itself, what remains uniquely yours?